The applause wiring trap. You were praised only when you performed, so now your identity clings to approval, until you forget who you are without it. This is the core of what I call the applause wiring trap, a psychological phenomenon rooted deep in our wiring, and it's as real as the heartbeat you feel when the crowd cheers or the silence that follows when the spotlight dims. Imagine a child, whose every smile from a parent is tied to achievements. A perfect grade, a goal scored, a flawless recital. Praise becomes a currency, an emotional reward that conditions the mind to link self-worth to external validation. But what happens when the performance ends? When the applause fades into the void of silence? The identity begins to fracture because the applause was never just a sound, it was a signal that you were enough. Without it, you feel invisible, unworthy, lost. The applause wiring trap is not just about craving praise, it's a deeply embedded neural loop formed through repeated experiences of conditional acceptance. Our brains are designed to seek connection and approval. It's how we survived as social animals. Yet, when that approval is only granted on the basis of performance, our neural circuits adapt to expect external validation as the only proof of value. This adaptation, while understandable, creates a dangerous dependency. Your sense of self becomes externally dictated, subject to the unpredictable tides of other people's judgment. Take the example of professional athletes. Many live their entire lives defined by their ability to perform. When injuries or age slow them down, they face an identity crisis far beyond the physical loss. They lose the applause that defined their very existence. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players ever, once spoke about how deeply challenging it was to find meaning off the court, after years of living for the cheers and accolades. His struggle illuminates how the applause wiring trap does not just rob us of peace, it threatens the very essence of who we think we are. Similarly, consider performers, artists, and creators who pour their hearts into their craft. When the audience stops applauding, even if for a brief moment, anxiety swells. The fear that their worth is tied solely to applause can be paralyzing. Social media magnifies this effect. Likes, comments, shares become modern applause, addictive and fleeting. The dopamine hit of virtual approval conditions the brain similarly, reinforcing a cycle where identity depends on external validation. But the applause, virtual or real, is an unstable foundation to build your sense of self. Psychologically, this trap manifests as what clinical psychologists call conditional self-esteem. Unlike healthy self-esteem, which is unconditional and rooted in intrinsic worth, conditional self-esteem requires meeting certain conditions, winning, achieving, being liked, to feel worthy. The danger is that when those conditions aren't met, people experience profound emptiness, anxiety, and even depression. They begin to question, who am I if I am not the sum of my successes? This internal conflict can lead to self-destructive behaviors as a desperate attempt to regain the applause, the approval, the feeling of being seen. One poignant real-life example is the story of Robin Williams. A man whose genius made millions laugh, whose performances won endless acclaim, yet behind the scenes, he wrestled with a profound sense of worth tied to his ability to perform. The applause was a double-edged sword. It lifted him to unimaginable heights but also ensnared him in a trap of identity dependency. The tragedy of his life is a powerful testament to how dangerous this wiring can be if left unchecked. How does one break free from the applause wiring trap? It starts with recognition. Understanding that your worth is not the sum of your achievements or the volume of applause you receive is crucial. You must begin to rewire your brain by nurturing unconditional self-acceptance. This means embracing your whole self, the parts that perform and the parts that rest. Practices such as mindfulness and self-compassion help retrain the mind to value the present self, not just the praised self. For example, mindfulness teaches you to observe thoughts and feelings without judgment, allowing you to notice when your self-worth becomes entangled with external approval. By cultivating an internal locus of validation, finding your own acceptance rather than seeking it outwardly, you reduce the power of the applause. It's like switching from being a plant that only thrives in the spotlight to one that flourishes in its own soil, regardless of sunlight. Another powerful approach is narrative reframing. By telling yourself stories where your identity is rooted in qualities beyond performance, kindness, resilience, creativity, presence, you begin to dismantle the old wiring. This redefinition takes time and deliberate effort because the brain is wired to cling to familiar patterns. But with persistence, new neural pathways form, shifting the source of your worth from applause to authentic self-recognition. Therapeutic interventions such as cognitive behavioral therapy often target these patterns. They help individuals identify and challenge the core belief that I am only worthy if I perform well, and replace it with healthier, unconditional beliefs. Group therapy can also be effective, offering a mirror where acceptance is given freely, without conditions, helping recalibrate the internal expectations about worth. Importantly, social support plays a crucial role. Being surrounded by people who accept you unconditionally reinforces the new wiring. It teaches the brain that approval can be genuine, constant, and not dependent on performance. This social recalibration helps break the cycle of the applause wiring trap. The applause wiring trap is pervasive in our achievement-driven culture. Schools reward grades, workplaces praise productivity, social media validates popularity. Each layer reinforces the message that to be loved or valued, you must perform. Yet, this model is fundamentally flawed because it externalizes self-worth and sets you up for endless cycles of anxiety and exhaustion. To escape, you must practice radical self-acceptance. This means loving the parts of you that are unseen, unremarkable, or resting. It means forgiving mistakes and imperfections and allowing yourself to exist without constant proof of value. This is not easy. It requires courage to face the silence after the applause and to fill it with your own voice. In that silence, you discover a truth often overlooked. Your identity is not a performance, it is your being. You are more than the sum of your successes or failures. When you stop defining yourself through applause, you begin to reclaim your freedom. You become the author of your own worth, rooted in the soil of your intrinsic humanity, not the transient cheers of an audience. This liberation is profound. It transforms anxiety into peace, exhaustion into rest, and loneliness into connection with self. The applause wiring trap can feel like a prison, but it can be dismantled. And as you dismantle it, you awaken to a life where your identity is no longer hostage to external approval but anchored in the unshakable ground of authentic self-worth. Remember, the journey away from the applause wiring trap is a journey inward, toward compassion, patience, and radical acceptance. It's where you stop performing for others and start living for yourself. And in that living, you find the applause that truly matters, the quiet, unwavering acceptance from within. The mirror neuron mirror. Your emotions aren't always purely your own. At first, that sounds strange. How could the feelings that surge through you be anything but your own? But science tells us a remarkable truth. Much of what we feel is absorbed through watching others. The brain has a network of special cells called mirror neurons, and these neurons allow us to deeply internalize the experiences of those around us. When you see someone in pain, joy, or fear, your mirror neurons fire as if you yourself were experiencing those emotions. Over time, this neurological echo can blend into your sense of self so completely that you believe these feelings originated from within you, when in fact they were learned, absorbed, or reflected back at you from others. Imagine watching a loved one suffer intense grief. You feel their sorrow so deeply that tears come to your eyes, your chest tightens, and a shadow falls over your mood. Neuroscientists have shown that when you witness someone else's emotional state, your mirror neurons activate in brain regions responsible for processing emotion. Your brain essentially simulates their experience. This is empathy's biological foundation, but it can also create a subtle emotional contamination. The pain you feel isn't strictly yours. It is a mental and emotional imprint of what you observed. This emotional resonance is not confined to close relationships. It permeates social interactions, large and small. Watching a movie with a tragic scene, hearing a friend's anxious confession, or even observing a stranger's fleeting expression can cause your mirror neurons to echo those feelings. This phenomenon runs deeper and more insidiously when repeated often. If you regularly witness certain emotions, whether it's constant fear from news cycles, repetitive anger in social settings, or chronic sadness in your environment, your brain begins to internalize these emotional states as baseline feelings. The boundaries between your own emotions and those reflected back from others blur. For instance, people living in highly stressful or traumatic environments often experience chronic anxiety or depression without initially understanding that these feelings were not purely self-generated but were absorbed from their surroundings. A powerful example comes from studies of caregivers and health workers. These individuals, who constantly witness pain and suffering, often experience what's called secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. Their mirror neurons are persistently activated, reflecting others' distress over and over, until their own emotional health becomes deeply affected. They carry the emotional weight of others as if it were their own trauma. This demonstrates the intense capacity of mirror neurons not only to allow empathy but also to blur the line between self and other in emotional experience. Mirror neurons also play a crucial role in social bonding and learning. From infancy, we learn to interpret emotional cues by mirroring facial expressions and bodily states of caregivers. A baby's smile, cry, or gasp triggers corresponding neural responses in parents, creating a feedback loop of emotional synchronization. This biological wiring ensures the infant's survival and emotional development. But as we grow, the same system means we often unconsciously absorb the emotional states of those we interact with regularly: family, friends, coworkers, and even media figures. Over time, this absorption can shape your personality and emotional landscape more than you realize. Consider the social contagion of emotions. When one person in a group begins to laugh, others soon join. When someone expresses fear, a ripple of anxiety can spread quickly through a crowd. Mirror neurons underlie these phenomena by creating a neural empathy bridge that connects individuals emotionally. This is why environments with high emotional intensity, whether positive or negative, can have a profound effect on your mood and behavior. You don't just witness others' emotions, you live them in a neurological sense. The dark side emerges when this system hijacks your authentic emotional self. If you spend too much time around toxic negativity, chronic stress, or manipulative people who project anger or fear, your brain's mirror neurons may lock you into these feelings involuntarily. You begin to carry emotional burdens not originally your own. You might think, "Why do I feel so anxious or sad?" without realizing you have internalized someone else's emotional turmoil. This can cause confusion, identity fragmentation, and emotional exhaustion. There is also a psychological dimension to this. When your brain mirrors another's pain or joy repeatedly, it not only creates emotional echoes but also rewires neural pathways to anticipate or expect these states. This can lead to emotional conditioning, where your mood fluctuates automatically in response to subtle cues, without conscious control. For example, if you grew up in a household where anger was frequent, your brain might be wired to expect conflict, making you hypervigilant or emotionally reactive even in neutral situations. The mirror neuron system enforces this learned emotional blueprint. But this mechanism is not a curse. It is the foundation of human connection and compassion. Without it, understanding others would be purely intellectual, lacking the visceral emotional depth that motivates care and cooperation. The challenge lies in maintaining emotional boundaries, to absorb empathy without losing your own emotional identity. Mindfulness practices, emotional self-awareness, and healthy social environments help regulate the mirror neuron response, allowing you to be empathic but emotionally resilient. In modern life, with constant exposure to screens, social media, and rapid emotional stimuli, the mirror neuron system is constantly engaged. We watch thousands of faces, stories, and emotional displays daily. This bombardment can overwhelm your mirror neurons, creating an emotional overload where your brain struggles to differentiate between your feelings and those you observe. This is why digital detoxes, setting boundaries on emotional consumption, and selective social exposure are critical for maintaining emotional health. Reflect on this. Every time you feel sudden anxiety watching a breaking news story or unexpected joy seeing a stranger's success, your brain's mirror neurons are at work. They bridge the gap between your inner world and others, sometimes blending those worlds so seamlessly that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Your emotions are a mirror reflecting not just your inner self, but the complex, interconnected emotional dance of those around you. Understanding the mirror neuron mirror means recognizing that your emotional experience is partly a shared human network, a collective interplay of feelings that cross individual boundaries. It's a humbling insight, but also empowering. By becoming aware of this process, you gain the ability to reclaim your emotional sovereignty, to distinguish your true feelings from those absorbed through empathy, and to cultivate emotional clarity in a world of constant emotional echoes. This deep, compelling understanding opens new doors. It explains why emotional healing often requires not just internal work, but also changes in environment and relationships. It sheds light on why some people feel drained in certain company, and why others feel uplifted. It highlights the profound impact social and cultural contexts have on individual emotional health. The mirror neuron mirror reveals a profound truth. Our emotions are not isolated phenomena but a shared experience, a neural symphony played across minds, binding us in a subtle, invisible web of feeling. Your pain, your joy, your fear, They are threads woven not only by your own life but by the lives you witness and the emotions you reflect. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward mastering your emotional world, turning the mirror inward to see clearly, and choosing which reflections you allow to shape your heart. The safety-reward paradox. Your brain is a master survival machine, wired over millions of years to protect you from harm. Every sensation of danger triggers an alarm system, a primal urge to freeze, flee, or fight. But there's a strange paradox at play in this deeply wired system, a paradox that quietly undermines your future, slowly shrinking the possibilities that life could offer you. This is the safety-reward paradox. At its core, this paradox reveals a hidden conflict between the brain's desire for safety and its reward system. Your brain rewards you for staying still, for not rocking the boat, for avoiding risks that could threaten your immediate sense of security. The feeling of safety, that calm after a storm, floods your neural circuits with dopamine, the chemical messenger that makes you feel good. And yet, ironically, this very reward for inaction can silently destroy your future potential. Imagine a moment of uncertainty. Perhaps a choice to change your career, speak your truth, or start a new relationship. The unknown is intimidating. Your brain's primitive alarm bells ring loud. Staying put feels like the safest option. No risks, no surprises. So you pause, and in that pause, your brain rewards you. You feel relief. You feel calm. You feel good. And that feeling acts like a powerful glue, binding you to safety. But what happens inside when you stay still? Your brain, eager to protect you, reduces the motivation to explore. The pathways to growth, novelty, and adaptation begin to fade, starved of use. Like a muscle left unused, your potential for new experiences weakens. Each moment of safety without challenge is a moment where your future possibilities narrow. Consider the story of someone trapped in a dead-end job. They feel stuck, but fear of change keeps them frozen. Every day they choose safety over risk, their brain rewards them with fleeting comfort. But over time, this comfort becomes a cage. The skills they might have gained, the passions they might have explored, quietly atrophy. Their future shrinks not because of external obstacles, but because their brain has wired them to reward safety, even at the cost of growth. This paradox is not just about comfort versus discomfort. It's about how the brain's reward system misleads us. It tricks us into believing that inaction is the path to happiness, when in reality, it's a slow erosion of possibility. This internal reward system is designed for survival, not for thriving. It keeps you alive by minimizing risk, but it does not know how to help you grow or evolve. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Our ancestors needed to avoid unnecessary risks to survive. But in the modern world, where growth, creativity, and change define success, this safety-reward loop becomes a trap. The brain's instinct to reward stillness was never meant to be the final answer, yet it often becomes so. Let's take a deeper look at the neurological dance behind this paradox. When you stay still in a moment of potential change, your brain activates the ventral striatum, a core area of the reward system. Dopamine surges, and you feel a burst of pleasure. This neurotransmitter signals, "Good job, you're safe." But simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and risk assessment, quietly dims its activity. Your ability to weigh long-term benefits weakens in favor of immediate reward. This creates a short circuit in your decision-making process. The immediate dopamine reward for safety overshadows the uncertain promise of growth. You begin to crave safety like a drug, not because it's truly beneficial in the long term, but because your brain is wired to associate it with reward. We see this paradox manifest in countless ways. The person who avoids confrontation to keep peace but loses their voice, the dreamer who never tries to launch a passion project for fear of failure, the individual who clings to routine because it feels safe, even as it drains their vitality. The paradox binds them in invisible chains of dopamine-driven comfort. The more you seek this safety, the more your brain reinforces the neural circuits that support inaction. This feedback loop makes it harder to break free. Your future possibilities aren't just fading, they are actively being overwritten by habits that prioritize survival over growth. However, there is hope. Understanding this paradox is the first step to reclaiming your future. When you recognize that the urge to stay safe is a dopamine-fueled illusion, you can begin to consciously override it. The brain's plasticity means you can rewire your reward system by introducing calculated risks and novel experiences. Each small step outside your comfort zone creates a new dopamine pathway, this time rewarding growth instead of stasis. Consider the person who starts with a tiny change, speaking up once in a meeting, signing up for a class, or trying a new hobby. These actions challenge the safety-reward loop. They activate the prefrontal cortex, signaling the brain to balance immediate reward with future possibilities. Over time, the brain learns to reward action, risk, and exploration, shifting from a survival mode to a thriving mode. The safety-reward paradox teaches us that comfort is not always kindness. Sometimes, the soft whisper of safety is a siren song that lulls us into destruction. It rewards stillness, but in doing so, it seals off the doors to the vast rooms of possibility waiting beyond fear. In life, growth demands movement. It demands stepping into uncertainty, embracing discomfort, and risking failure. Your brain may resist, pulling you back with waves of dopamine's false comfort. But the paradox is also a call to courage, a reminder that what feels safe in the moment may actually be the most dangerous trap of all. If you want to reclaim your future, you must learn to feel the discomfort and still move forward. You must understand that the brain's reward for safety is a mechanism designed for survival, not for thriving. The freedom to grow, to explore, to become more, comes from rewiring this reward system. By embracing risk in small, deliberate ways, you teach your brain a new truth. That growth, not safety, is the true path to lasting fulfillment. You unlock doors that were once sealed shut by dopamine's comforting chains. You expand your world beyond the limits of fear. The safety-reward paradox is not a flaw but a feature of our biology, one that served us in the past but demands conscious correction today. The power to break free lies in your hands. The moment you choose movement over stillness, courage over comfort, you begin to reprogram your brain's deepest wiring. Your future depends not on the safety you cling to, but on the risks you dare to take. The reward is waiting, but only if you step beyond the illusion of comfort and into the unknown possibilities that await. The emotional freeze reflex. The emotional freeze reflex is a powerful survival mechanism deeply embedded within our nervous system, shaped by the harsh reality that showing vulnerability, especially through emotions, can sometimes lead to punishment. When someone experiences repeated negative consequences for expressing feelings, whether as a child or adult, the body adapts. It learns to suppress emotional expression as a protective shield, to guard itself against further pain or rejection. This suppression can be so intense that even the most profound emotions, like love, become muted or hidden beneath a surface of numbness. Over time, this numbness can be mistaken for strength, a sign of resilience, when in truth it often masks deep internal struggle and isolation. Imagine a child who cries out in fear or sadness and is met with harsh reprimands or neglect instead of comfort. Over time, this child begins to understand that showing these emotions leads to more pain. The brain and body, designed to protect life at all costs, start to freeze, shutting down the natural flow of emotion to avoid triggering further harm. This freeze reflex is not a conscious choice but an automatic response, akin to the freeze reaction animals show when threatened by predators. It is a form of dissociation where the emotional part of the self retreats, leaving a shell that appears calm, steady, or even stoic. This reflex has profound implications. The suppression of emotions is often misunderstood. Society frequently praises stoicism and self-control, interpreting numbness or emotional withdrawal as a form of maturity or toughness. But underneath, this emotional freeze comes with a cost. The inability to feel fully disconnects a person from their authentic self and from others. It can lead to loneliness, as genuine emotional connection requires openness and vulnerability. It can also lead to confusion, as people struggle to identify or trust their own feelings, questioning what they truly want or need. The science behind this is rooted in how the brain processes trauma and stress. The autonomic nervous system controls our fight, flight, and freeze responses. When fight or flight is impossible or fails, the freeze response kicks in as a last resort. This freeze is marked by a shutting down of emotional processing regions in the brain, such as the amygdala and insula, to reduce the overwhelming sensations associated with trauma. Neurochemicals flood the system, dulling pain and feeling. While this may save the body from immediate harm, it creates long-term challenges for emotional regulation and psychological health. Consider the example of abuse survivors. Many report feeling emotionally numb, detached from their feelings, as if they are watching their lives from behind a thick glass wall. This numbness is their brain's way of surviving unbearable pain. They may appear strong to others because they do not cry or react outwardly, but internally, the emotional freeze is a wound in itself. Healing requires carefully unfreezing these feelings, often through therapy or supportive relationships that create safety and trust. Even outside of trauma, the emotional freeze reflex can develop in everyday life when expressing emotion is discouraged. In some cultures or families, showing sadness, fear, or even love openly is seen as weakness or inappropriate. Children learn to hide emotions to avoid shame or punishment. Over time, this learned emotional silence becomes a default state. Adults carry this learned reflex into their relationships and workplaces, creating a society that undervalues emotional honesty and depth. There is also a paradox here. The more one suppresses emotions, the more they may leak out unexpectedly, sometimes through anger, irritability, or anxiety. The body and mind do not simply erase feelings, they store them in complex ways. The freeze reflex might stop tears or laughter, but it cannot erase the underlying emotions. This unresolved emotional energy can create stress-related illnesses, chronic pain, or mental health disorders. The body holds onto what the mind cannot express. Breaking free from the emotional freeze reflex is not easy. It requires building safe environments where vulnerability is accepted and even celebrated. It calls for learning to recognize subtle emotional signals, to re-engage with feelings without fear, and to develop new patterns of emotional expression. This process can be gradual, requiring patience and courage. But it is essential for reclaiming a full, authentic life. In relationships, understanding the emotional freeze reflex helps us be more compassionate. When someone seems cold or distant, it may not be indifference but a protective mechanism born from past pain. Instead of frustration, offering patience and safety invites thawing. Real strength lies not in numbness but in the courage to feel, to be seen, and to connect deeply. The emotional freeze reflex teaches us about the complex interplay between survival and emotional expression. It shows how deeply intertwined our bodies and minds are, how past experiences shape present realities, and how healing is a journey back to feeling fully alive. Recognizing this reflex within ourselves and others opens the door to empathy, self-awareness, and ultimately, emotional freedom. So next time you or someone you know withdraws emotionally or seems unreachable, remember, beneath that frozen surface is a story of survival, a silent plea for safety, and a hidden capacity for love waiting to be unfrozen. The shame-based operating system. If every mistake you ever made was met with shame, if every time you stumbled or faltered you were met not with understanding, but with scorn and silent judgment, then your mind begins to rewire itself in ways you might never fully realize. This isn't just about feeling embarrassed or awkward. This is about your brain learning to expect shame before you even act. It's as if your nervous system starts preloading guilt, anxiety, and self-criticism in anticipation of failure, even when nothing has gone wrong yet. This is the core of the shame-based operating system. From early childhood, many of us experience moments when we are corrected harshly or shamed for simple mistakes. A spilled drink, a missed question, an overlooked detail. If the reaction is shame rather than guidance, the brain stores this as a warning signal. Over time, these small signals accumulate into a framework where shame becomes the default response mechanism. Instead of being a reaction to an event, shame transforms into a preemptive filter. It whispers, "Better not try," or "You'll fail again, so why bother?" before you even take the first step. Consider the neural pathways here. The brain's limbic system, responsible for emotion and survival instincts, becomes wired to detect potential shame-triggering scenarios. The prefrontal cortex, which governs planning and decision-making, receives these warning signals and filters choices through a lens of anticipated shame and rejection. This means your thoughts, your actions, and your sense of self become governed by a fear of shame that's running quietly beneath conscious awareness. Let's explore how this plays out in everyday life. Imagine a child learning to draw. Each time their attempt is met with harsh criticism or shame, "That's messy," "You're not trying hard enough," or worse, "Why can't you do it right like others?" The child's brain starts to anticipate these reactions. The next time they pick up a crayon, their excitement is tainted by anxiety. The possibility of shame hovers even before the first stroke is made. Instead of curiosity and creativity, there's hesitation and self-doubt. The shame-based system is silently blocking their potential. But it's not just children. Adults carry this shame-based programming deep within their subconscious. Maybe it shows up as procrastination. You know you have an important project, but you delay starting it because the thought of imperfection or failure ignites a cascade of shame memories. Maybe it appears as perfectionism, a compulsive attempt to avoid shame by controlling every detail, never allowing mistakes to surface. Or it manifests as self-sabotage, where deep down you feel undeserving of success or happiness because shame has convinced you that you are fundamentally flawed. This shame-based operating system also rewires your self-identity. When shame dominates your internal narrative, you begin to believe that mistakes define you rather than actions or intentions. You might label yourself as stupid, lazy, or unworthy based on a single misstep. These labels then become mental prisons, restricting your growth and reinforcing the cycle of shame. This is why shame is one of the most corrosive emotions. It doesn't just hurt momentarily, it rewires your brain to expect failure and hide your true potential. There is a biological survival mechanism behind this as well. Shame, like fear, evolved to protect us from social exclusion, which in ancestral environments could mean death. Your brain interprets shame as a threat to your social standing and safety. But in the modern world, this system can become maladaptive. Instead of protecting you, it traps you inside a loop of guilt and anticipation of rejection, often when none is warranted. This trap reduces risk-taking, creativity, and even genuine connection with others, because you are constantly on guard against the shame you expect to encounter. For example, imagine a talented musician who grew up with parents or teachers who shamed any imperfection. Each time they miss a note, they hear a mental echo of disapproval. As a result, instead of performing with passion, they play it safe, avoiding challenging pieces or opportunities to perform live. Their potential remains locked behind an invisible wall constructed from preloaded shame. Breaking free from this shame-based operating system requires deep self-awareness and deliberate rewiring. The first step is recognizing when shame is controlling your thoughts and actions. Notice the internal voices that say, "You can't," or "You'll embarrass yourself." These are the shame system's preemptive warnings. When you catch these thoughts, you can begin to question their validity. Replacing shame with self-compassion is critical. Instead of, "I'm a failure," try, "I made a mistake, but that doesn't define me." This subtle shift rewires your brain's response to errors from punishment to learning. Studies show that self-compassion activates brain regions associated with positive emotion and reduces activity in areas linked to threat and fear. Over time, this can dismantle the shame-based operating system and build a healthier, more resilient mindset. Therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, compassionate mind training, and somatic practices also help by addressing the emotional and physical roots of shame. Shame isn't just a thought. It's often stored in the body as tension, constriction, or a freeze response. Releasing these physical patterns through mindfulness or movement can unlock stuck emotional energy. Another powerful tool is vulnerability. When you allow yourself to be seen honestly, including your mistakes and imperfections, you undermine shame's power. It thrives in secrecy and isolation. Sharing your struggles with trusted others weakens shame's hold and builds authentic connection, which is the antidote to shame's corrosive loneliness. Understanding the shame-based operating system also helps us create more compassionate environments. Whether parenting, teaching, or leading, responding to mistakes with empathy rather than shame encourages growth and curiosity. It teaches the brain that errors are part of learning, not a signal of worthlessness. In the end, the shame-based operating system is a deeply ingrained, often invisible force that shapes how you view yourself and the world. It preloads guilt and fear in anticipation of failure, shutting down your potential before it can even emerge. But it is not immutable. With awareness, compassion, and courage, you can rewire this system and reclaim your freedom to act, create, and grow without the paralyzing weight of shame. This journey is neither quick nor easy, but the reward is profound. A mind that welcomes imperfection, embraces growth, and honors your true potential beyond the shadow of shame. Remember, you are not your mistakes, and your worth is not conditional on flawless performance. In learning to see shame not as a judge, but as a passing shadow, you begin to live more fully, more freely, and more authentically than you ever imagined possible. The Help Me program. You were only noticed when in crisis, so now, your subconscious creates chaos to feel worthy of care and attention. This is the core of what I call the Help Me program, a deeply ingrained psychological pattern that silently controls behavior and emotional responses. At its essence, this program is a survival mechanism born from early life experiences where attention, love, or validation came primarily during moments of distress or emergency. Imagine a child growing up in an environment where peace is invisible but turmoil commands all eyes and ears. In such a setting, calmness equals neglect, while chaos equals connection. The subconscious mind, desperate for recognition, learns to manufacture or amplify crises to trigger care. This is not manipulation in a conscious sense. It is an automatic, deeply wired response, a program running beneath awareness. The Help Me program functions like a distress beacon wired into your nervous system. When you feel unseen or insignificant, the program activates by generating emotional turbulence, conflict, or even physical symptoms. These crises force the people around you to respond, to engage, to notice you. It is as if your subconscious is saying, "I need to be seen," and the only way to be seen is to signal emergency. This cycle is exhausting, painful, and often misunderstood, but it is rooted in a primal need for connection and safety. The paradox is that the very chaos you create to feel worthy often pushes people away, perpetuating a cycle of loneliness and further crisis. Take, for example, a person who grew up in a family where love was scarce except during moments of crisis, arguments, illness, or dramatic events. As an adult, this person may unconsciously provoke conflict or become overwhelmed with stress to recreate the conditions under which they felt truly seen. The subconscious cannot distinguish between healthy attention and attention born from crisis. It only knows that chaos equals connection. This can manifest as repeatedly entering toxic relationships, exaggerating problems, or even psychosomatic symptoms that demand care. Clinical psychology often refers to this as a form of trauma bonding or learned helplessness. The individual's nervous system is conditioned to believe that survival depends on activating alarm signals. Over time, this Help Me program rewires the brain's reward circuits to associate attention with distress signals rather than with calm presence or mutual care. Dopamine and oxytocin, the chemicals of reward and bonding, get released not only during positive interaction but also during the heightened state of crisis. This biochemical reinforcement traps the individual in a relentless loop. One striking real-life example can be seen in certain patterns of borderline personality disorder or complex PTSD, where crises become a primary mode of communication and survival. These individuals often feel invisible until chaos erupts, and then, suddenly, they command care, sometimes in overwhelming or destructive ways. The Help Me program explains why breaking this cycle is so difficult. It is not a matter of willpower but of rewiring deeply entrenched survival instincts. Social media and modern life further fuel this program. The constant flood of notifications, emergency alerts, and viral dramas creates an environment where attention is currency, often earned through outrage or crisis. The subconscious wiring that evolved to signal for real, physical care in moments of danger now triggers with every digital ping, amplifying anxiety and emotional dysregulation. The Help Me program finds fertile ground here, making it harder than ever to find peace without chaos. How does one begin to dismantle the Help Me program? It starts with awareness, a compassionate, non-judgmental recognition that this pattern exists and that it once served a purpose. Understanding that the urge to create chaos is not a moral failing but a survival instinct reduces shame and opens space for healing. This awareness is the first crack in the armor. Next is the challenging process of retraining the nervous system. Practices like somatic therapy, mindfulness meditation, and grounding techniques help calm the fight-or-flight responses that fuel the Help Me program. By learning to tolerate calmness and stillness without triggering anxiety, the brain can relearn that safety and connection do not require emergency signals. This gradual rewiring creates new neural pathways, allowing for healthier responses to feelings of neglect or invisibility. Therapeutic relationships play a crucial role in this healing journey. A therapist or support network that offers consistent, unconditional presence teaches the subconscious that attention and care can be given without crisis. This steady validation helps weaken the learned association between chaos and worthiness. Over time, the Help Me program loses its grip, replaced by a more balanced, stable sense of self. Importantly, self-compassion is essential. Those trapped in this program often internalize messages that they are too difficult or unlovable without crisis. The truth is the opposite. Your worth is inherent and not contingent on how loudly you call for help. By practicing gentle self-kindness, you create a foundation upon which new, healthier patterns can grow. The Help Me program is deeply human because it arises from a fundamental need to be seen and valued. Yet, it becomes a prison when that need is only met through chaos. Recognizing this program in yourself or others offers a profound opportunity for transformation. It invites a shift from survival-driven signaling to thriving through authentic connection. Imagine a life where your presence alone commands care, where you no longer need to manufacture storms to feel noticed. This freedom is possible. It begins with the courage to face the quiet spaces within and to trust that calmness can be just as worthy of attention as crisis. It is the hardest path, but also the most liberating. As you listen to this, consider how many times you or someone you know may have unknowingly run the Help Me program, creating storms to be seen, only to feel more alone afterward. Healing starts with breaking the cycle, learning to sit in silence without fear, and opening to the possibility that you are enough, chaos or no chaos. Your subconscious may still try to signal in old ways, but with awareness, practice, and support, you can retrain those signals. You can become the calm eye of your own storm, the steady source of care and connection that you have always sought. The Help Me program is a call for healing, a journey back to your intrinsic worth beyond crisis. Embrace it, and you step into a life where your value is not measured by the noise you make, but by the quiet power of simply being. The identity costume reflex. You wore a role so long to survive, it became a personality. This simple yet profound statement reveals a deep truth about how identity can be shaped not by who we truly are, but by the masks we wear to navigate the world. When survival depends on performing a certain role, whether at work, within family, or social circles, that role can overtake your sense of self. The applause you receive, the recognition you earn for this performance, starts to feel more real and more valuable than inner peace or authentic self-acceptance ever did. At its core, the identity costume reflex is about adaptation that becomes entrapment. Imagine a child growing up in an environment where approval is scarce unless they behave in a specific way: the perfect student, the responsible sibling, or the class clown. To avoid rejection or punishment, the child learns to act out these roles. Over time, this performance becomes automatic, internalized, and rigid. It is no longer just a role. They have stitched this costume so tightly that it feels like their true skin. Take the example of a successful professional who always plays the confident, decisive leader. This persona may have originally been a deliberate choice to gain respect and influence. But after years of sustaining this front, any moment of doubt or vulnerability feels like a threat to identity itself. The applause from colleagues and the validation that comes from looking the part becomes addictive. Yet, behind this mask, a silent peace, the freedom to be imperfect, uncertain, or quiet, is missing. The applause becomes a drug, a constant external fuel that keeps the costume alive, even when the person inside feels hollow or exhausted. This phenomenon is deeply tied to human psychological needs, the need for belonging, recognition, and safety. When these needs are only met by performing a role, the brain solidifies that role as identity. Neuroscience suggests that repeated behavior patterns and emotional responses become encoded as neural circuits. The costume, initially flexible and temporary, becomes a neural habit that rewires the brain's sense of self. So, even when circumstances change, or when the role no longer serves well-being, the person struggles to shed the costume because it feels like losing themselves. Consider actors or performers who admit to struggling with separating themselves from their characters. Some stay trapped in the personas they portray, confused where the role ends and the real person begins. The identity costume reflex is similar but often less obvious. It happens in everyday life, not just on stage. The person who is always the caretaker, the strong one, the cheerful one, the aggressive negotiator, or the silent martyr may lose touch with the inner self beneath these roles. This can lead to emotional and existential exhaustion. When applause feels more real than peace, the person becomes dependent on external validation to feel alive or worthy. The constant need to perform drains emotional reserves, leading to burnout and alienation. The applause, which once signified acceptance, morphs into a prison because without it, the costume threatens to unravel. The silence of true peace is unfamiliar, even frightening, because it demands authentic presence without disguise. The paradox here is that survival through performance paradoxically diminishes survival of the authentic self. The costume protects against immediate threats, rejection, judgment, invisibility, but slowly erodes the foundation of identity. The applause may momentarily fill the void, but it can never replace the quiet, steady flame of self-acceptance. This gap between external validation and internal peace is at the heart of many modern struggles with anxiety, depression, and identity crises. An illustrative case is someone who achieves career success by embodying a hard-driving, unemotional leader. They may earn accolades, promotions, and public praise. Yet, privately, they feel disconnected from their emotions, isolated, and restless. The applause validates their outer mask but cannot heal the loneliness within. Their true self remains unseen, unheard, and yearning for rest. Breaking free from the identity costume reflex requires immense courage and self-awareness. It means learning to distinguish between the roles you play and the core of who you are beneath them. This process is not about abandoning responsibility or shedding all social roles. That is impossible and undesirable. Rather, it is about reclaiming the self beneath the costumes and allowing space for peace, vulnerability, and authenticity. Therapies like mindfulness, narrative work, and somatic experiencing help individuals recognize the difference between conditioned roles and genuine self. Mindfulness cultivates presence, allowing you to witness the costume without identifying with it fully. Narrative therapy encourages rewriting the story you tell yourself about who you must be, opening pathways to new roles aligned with authentic values. Somatic work reconnects mind and body, helping dissolve habitual tensions and postures that anchor the costume. Another key is cultivating relationships and environments that honor the authentic self beyond performance. When you find people who accept you without applause or masks, you experience glimpses of peace that gradually grow stronger. These safe spaces are emotional sanctuaries where you can rest from performance, recharge, and integrate the multiple facets of identity. It's also vital to recognize that the applause trap thrives in cultures and systems that reward performance over presence. Social media, competitive workplaces, and even family dynamics often reinforce the need to wear costumes and seek external validation. Awareness of these pressures allows conscious choice, either to engage with them without losing yourself or to create boundaries that protect your peace. Ultimately, the identity costume reflex reveals a fundamental tension of the human condition, the balance between survival through adaptation and the longing for authentic existence. We all wear many masks to navigate life, but when the mask becomes the face, we risk losing the very essence that makes us uniquely alive. Remember, peace is not the absence of applause, it is the presence of self-acceptance, unshaken by external performance or validation. The costume can be shed, but only when you have found the courage to meet yourself behind the mask, to embrace imperfections, fears, and silences with compassion. The journey is not simple, nor quick. It demands facing uncomfortable truths and dismantling habitual defenses. But within this journey lies profound freedom, to live not as a role, but as a whole person, fully present and deeply at peace. This is the path from surviving in a costume to thriving in authentic identity. The emotional withholding cycle, when love is earned rather than freely given, the very architecture of your nervous system changes. What should have been a natural flow of connection, warmth, and safety becomes a cold ledger of transactions. Vulnerability, that delicate act of opening your heart, is no longer a gift but a calculated risk, a balance sheet where every expression of emotion demands repayment. This is the emotional withholding cycle, a haunting loop rooted deeply in early experience and wired into the core of your being. From the moment we are born, the way we receive love shapes our emotional blueprint. For some, love arrives unconditionally, flowing freely as a river without expectation. For others, love is conditional, granted only when certain invisible standards are met: perfect behavior, silence, achievement, or endurance. When love is earned rather than given, the nervous system learns to protect itself fiercely. It becomes hypervigilant, alert to threats of rejection or abandonment, and so it builds walls made of withheld emotions. This cycle begins with an unspoken contract. To be loved, you must prove your worth. And proving worth often means guarding your true feelings, your fears, your needs, your pain, because showing vulnerability becomes a dangerous gamble. If you reveal too much, you risk losing the love you worked so hard to earn. So, emotions become a currency, tightly controlled, rationed, and withheld. Consider the child who grows up in an environment where affection is given only for achievements. A smile comes after a good grade, a hug after obeying quietly. The child learns that love must be earned and that vulnerability might cost them that love. This conditioning creates an internal nervous system pattern. Feelings are not safe to express freely. Instead, they are stored, hidden, and guarded. As this child grows into adulthood, the emotional withholding cycle tightens its grip. In relationships, the brain triggers the fight-or-flight response at the hint of vulnerability. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, sounds an alarm whenever you risk exposing your authentic self. This alarm is not rational. It is primal and relentless. It signals you to clamp down, to withhold your emotions as a defense mechanism. But this defense comes with a steep cost. When you withhold emotions, you block intimacy. True connection requires openness and trust, but the emotional withholding cycle replaces this with distance and loneliness. You may appear calm, collected, and even successful on the outside, but inside, you feel unseen, unheard, and profoundly isolated. The paradox is that your nervous system craves safety, yet the very act of withholding creates emotional isolation, a deep, aching loneliness that no achievement or external approval can fill. This cycle perpetuates itself through feedback loops. Withholding emotions leads to feelings of disconnection, which then reinforce the belief that vulnerability is unsafe. The nervous system hardens further, and the walls grow higher. The more you protect yourself, the more you suffer from the pain of being protected against. Imagine an adult in a relationship who struggles to share their fears or needs. They may say, "I'm fine," when they're not. They might avoid difficult conversations or suppress tears to maintain a facade of strength. Their partner senses the distance but doesn't understand its roots. The relationship feels stagnant, starved of emotional nourishment. Both partners long for closeness but are trapped in the cycle of emotional withholding. Breaking this cycle is not a simple act of willpower. It requires deep nervous system recalibration and rewiring. The brain must relearn that vulnerability is not a threat but a doorway to safety and connection. This process often begins with small acts of courage, sharing a hidden feeling with a trusted friend, allowing yourself to cry in private, or simply acknowledging your need for love without judgment. Therapies like somatic experiencing, trauma-informed counseling, and mindfulness can help soothe the hypervigilant nervous system. These approaches teach the brain to down-regulate the amygdala's alarms, slowly allowing trust to grow where fear once dominated. Over time, the emotional withholding cycle loosens its grip, and the heart begins to open. Consider the power of emotional generosity. When love is given freely, without conditions or expectations, it rewires the brain toward safety. Acts of kindness, acceptance, and presence flood the nervous system with oxytocin, the bonding hormone that calms fear and deepens connection. The brain learns that it's safe to be seen and heard. Vulnerability transforms from a transaction to a gift. Yet, the journey out of the emotional withholding cycle demands patience and self-compassion. It challenges deeply held beliefs shaped by childhood and reinforced through years of survival. Every step forward requires facing the fear of rejection, of being unlovable, or of being too much. But with each courageous moment, the nervous system rewrites its old scripts. When you begin to give love freely, not as a reward but as your natural state, you reclaim your emotional freedom. You stop bargaining with your feelings and start living with your whole heart. The emotional withholding cycle breaks, and in its place blooms authentic connection, both with yourself and others. Your nervous system, once trapped in a loop of mistrust and protection, learns a new dance, one of openness, safety, and belonging. The fear that once controlled your emotions softens, replaced by a quiet knowing that you are worthy of love just as you are. This is the profound transformation waiting beyond the emotional withholding cycle, a life where vulnerability is no longer a risk, but the most powerful expression of true strength and love. The parental echo code, your inner voice, the one that narrates your thoughts, doubts, hopes, and fears, might not be entirely your own. Deep within your mind, echoing through the corridors of your consciousness, is the voice of those who raised you, the parents, guardians, or caretakers whose words shaped your earliest understanding of the world and yourself. This phenomenon, which we can call the parental echo code, is a real, psychological imprint where phrases, beliefs, limits, and emotional wounds are looped into your decision-making process, often unconsciously. It is as if the voices of our past constantly whisper, guide, or even imprison us within patterns they created long ago. This internal echo is not merely a memory or a faint recollection. It is a living force within the psyche that colors how we see ourselves and how we respond to life's challenges. When you hear a harsh self-criticism, a doubt, or a limiting thought, it might not originate from your true self but from the internalized voice of a parent or caregiver who once said, "You're not good enough, be careful," or "You'll never succeed." These phrases become encoded in the mind's background, replaying automatically and influencing choices and emotional reactions without conscious awareness. Consider the example of a person who constantly hears an inner warning, "Don't try too hard, or you'll fail," echoing from their childhood. This voice might have originated from a parent's own fears or a critical remark meant to protect or control. Over time, this message becomes a filter through which opportunities are judged and risks avoided, limiting personal growth. The person might wonder why they hesitate or self-sabotage, unaware that this parental echo is silently steering their behavior. Neuroscience and psychology help explain this. The human brain, especially in early development, is like a sponge absorbing not only language but emotional tone, attitudes, and subtle cues from caregivers. The voices that soothe, scold, or encourage create neural pathways that become foundational to the self. The internal dialogue, often called self-talk, originates here, intertwining with core identity. When those early voices are loving and supportive, the inner voice nurtures confidence and resilience. But when those voices carry criticism, fear, or limitation, the inner voice becomes a prison of inherited beliefs. These internalized messages are not limited to direct words. They include unspoken attitudes, fears, and unresolved wounds. A parent's anxiety about failure or societal pressures can become embedded in their child's mind, creating loops of worry and self-doubt. The echo is not always recognizable because it speaks in the language of your own thoughts, camouflaged as reason or instinct. It feels like your own voice but carries the weight of someone else's fears and patterns. One profound example is how the parental echo code influences self-worth. A child told repeatedly that they are too sensitive or too difficult may internalize these judgments, shaping an inner voice that dismisses their own feelings or silences their needs. As an adult, this voice can manifest as chronic self-criticism or an inability to assert oneself, all rooted in the echoes of parental messages. Healing requires recognizing that this voice is not the true self but a coded script inherited and replayed. Therapeutic practices often focus on disentangling this code. Mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and inner child work invite individuals to listen carefully to their inner voices, identify which phrases belong to the parental echo, and consciously rewrite or challenge them. This process is intense and compelling because it confronts not only memories but deeply ingrained neural patterns. It requires courage to face these echoes without judgment and to reclaim personal agency. The parental echo code also explains why breaking cycles of family dysfunction can be so difficult. When voices of limitation and fear are deeply embedded, they pass silently through generations, shaping behaviors, choices, and emotional responses. A parent's unresolved trauma or fears become the unseen soundtrack of a child's inner world, often unconsciously repeated unless consciously addressed. On the other hand, this code can also be a source of strength. Positive echoes, words of encouragement, love, and belief, resonate through the inner voice, fostering resilience and hope. When a child grows up hearing, "You are enough," "You can do this," or "I believe in you," these affirmations become internalized anchors during adversity. The challenge is learning to distinguish between harmful echoes and those that empower. In daily life, the parental echo code manifests in countless subtle ways. It can show up as hesitation before speaking up, as self-doubt before trying something new, or as repeated thoughts of unworthiness despite evidence to the contrary. These moments are invitations to pause and ask, whose voice is this really? Is this my authentic self, or the echo of someone who once shaped me? Understanding this internal dialogue reshapes our relationship with ourselves. It reveals that many of the limits we experience are not innate but inherited and thus can be transformed. By consciously listening, questioning, and rewriting these echoes, we free ourselves from invisible chains and create space for authentic self-expression. The parental echo code is a reminder that the voices of our past shape us profoundly but do not have to define us forever. Awareness is the first step toward liberation. With intention, we can learn to nurture a new inner voice, one grounded in self-compassion, truth, and freedom. This journey is deeply personal yet universal. Everyone carries echoes from their upbringing, some louder, some quieter. Recognizing them offers a powerful opportunity for healing and growth. It challenges us to rewrite the script of our inner dialogue, moving from reactive patterns to conscious authorship of our thoughts and choices. As you listen to your inner voice today, pay close attention to its tone, language, and content. Can you hear the echoes of the past? If so, What would it mean to speak back to that voice, not as a child, but as a free, aware adult? This act of conscious dialogue is the key to breaking free from inherited limits and stepping fully into your own life. Ultimately, the parental echo code is a testament to the lasting power of early relationships and the possibility of transformation. By understanding and rewriting these echoes, we reclaim not just our thoughts but our entire sense of self. The voices that once shaped us become tools, not chains, to build a future defined by our own truth. The scarcity time scar. You were rushed through childhood, pressured to grow fast, to achieve early, to keep pace with a relentless clock that seemed set to accelerate the very essence of your life. This pressure leaves behind what I call the scarcity time scar, a deep, often invisible wound in your perception of time itself. Instead of seeing time as an abundant, flowing river you can swim alongside, you experience it as a ticking enemy, a finite resource slipping away too fast, forcing you to rush, to panic, to fight against the very moments that make up your existence. This scar is born in environments where time is scarce, not just in hours or minutes, but in emotional availability, patience, and presence. When childhood is dominated by constant rushing, deadlines, and the unspoken message that slowing down means falling behind, the brain internalizes a scarcity mindset about time. Instead of a playground for growth and exploration, time becomes a battlefield where every second lost is a defeat. Neurologically, this operates through the brain's stress response system. The amygdala, which detects threats, is triggered by experiences of pressure and urgency. When this activation becomes chronic during critical developmental stages, it rewires the way your brain processes time. Instead of calm, reflective states where moments stretch and deepen, you develop a survival mode timing, a perception that time is a scarce commodity to be hoarded, controlled, or used up as fast as possible. This rewiring shapes your default mental rhythm and decision-making patterns, even into adulthood. For example, think about a child who is constantly told to hurry. Hurry up and eat, hurry up and finish homework, hurry up and grow up. This child's nervous system learns that time is always running out, never enough to enjoy what is happening right now. This urgency imprints on their nervous system like a code. Slow is dangerous, fast is safe. As a result, this child grows into an adult who struggles with patience, mindfulness, or simply being present. They are trapped in a mental race against the clock, always looking to the next task or milestone rather than savoring the current moment. This scarcity time scar also fuels anxiety, burnout, and decision paralysis. When your brain constantly signals that time is running out, it floods your system with stress hormones like cortisol. Elevated cortisol not only damages cognitive functions like memory and attention, but also narrows your focus, making you hypervigilant to deadlines and time pressure. Instead of seeing multiple possibilities, you see only urgency and limitation. This can lead to reckless rushing or, paradoxically, procrastination born from overwhelm. Consider a professional overwhelmed by a packed schedule. Their internal clock screams scarcity, there's not enough time to do everything. This creates a loop of stress that makes focusing harder, slows productivity, and ironically wastes more time. Their perception is locked into a scarcity frame that warps how they value and use their own moments. It's not just a scheduling problem, it's a deep psychological wound dating back to childhood conditioning. The scarcity time scar also distorts your relationship with rest and play. If you've learned to see time as something to be conquered or outpaced, leisure becomes guilt. Rest is a luxury you feel you cannot afford. Play is something to be squeezed in or skipped entirely. This disconnection from natural rhythms of effort and recovery drains creativity, joy, and emotional resilience. Instead of flowing with time's natural cycles, you are constantly pushing against them, which deepens exhaustion and stress. Breaking free from this scarcity time scar requires a radical shift in your internal narrative about time. It's not about getting more hours or becoming more efficient, but about reshaping how you experience and relate to time. One powerful approach is cultivating mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment without judgment. Mindfulness gently rewires the brain to perceive time as fluid and expansive rather than scarce and threatening. Studies show that regular mindfulness practice decreases amygdala activity and enhances prefrontal cortex function, improving emotional regulation and reducing the stress response. Another key is embracing the idea of enough time. This means consciously rejecting the internalized message that you must constantly rush to meet endless demands. Instead, it's about affirming that the time you have right now is sufficient to be fully alive. Practices like journaling, deep breathing, or simply pausing throughout the day to observe your surroundings can create small pockets where time feels abundant and rich. Reclaiming your time also means setting boundaries and prioritizing what truly matters. When you honor your limits and choose your engagements with intention rather than reaction, you push back against the scarcity narrative. This may mean saying no to things that drain you or rushing and yes to moments that nurture your soul. Over time, these choices rewrite your brain's expectations and create new neural pathways aligned with abundance rather than scarcity. It's important to recognize that the scarcity time scar isn't a personal failing. It's a wound inflicted by the culture and conditions in which you grew up. The hyper-accelerated pace of modern life, the pressure to achieve early, and societal values that equate busyness with worth all contribute. Healing this scar is an act of resistance against these forces. It is reclaiming your right to a time experience that nourishes rather than diminishes. Let me share an example. Imagine an artist who used to feel frantic about deadlines, constantly rushing to finish pieces to meet expectations set early in life. After learning mindfulness and setting intentional time boundaries, they begin to experience their creative process differently. They no longer race against the clock but enter a state of flow where time feels suspended, abundant, and generous. Their work deepens in quality and their stress diminishes. This transformation isn't just about scheduling. It's about healing the scarcity time scar and reprogramming the brain's relationship with time itself. In conclusion, the scarcity time scar is a profound imprint left by a rushed, pressured childhood where time was never enough. It shapes your brain and nervous system to treat time as an enemy to fight rather than a partner to embrace. This scar fuels anxiety, burnout, and disconnection from presence, robbing you of joy and creative potential. But it is not irreversible. Through mindfulness, intentional living, boundary setting, and self-compassion, you can rewire your brain to experience time as abundant, fluid, and expansive. This healing opens the door to a richer, more grounded way of living where you no longer run from time but dance with it, moment by moment. Your time is not a scarcity to fear. It is a gift to be held with reverence, patience, and love. When you heal this scar, you reclaim your life from the tyranny of the clock and open yourself to the true rhythm of your existence. The safety-first addiction. You were raised where danger was constant, so your brain learned that calm is boring and chaos is thrilling, making peace itself feel like a threat. This is what I call the safety-first addiction, a deeply wired psychological pattern born from living in environments where survival demanded hypervigilance and constant alertness. When danger is the norm, your nervous system adapts to prioritize readiness, scanning for threats and reacting quickly. In such states, the calm that others seek becomes unsettling, almost foreign, because your brain equates stillness with vulnerability. Imagine growing up in a household marked by unpredictability, raised voices, sudden conflicts, emotional volatility. In that world, the adrenaline spikes that come from chaos become your baseline. The moments of peace feel so strange, so unfamiliar, that they trigger unease or even fear. Your brain's reward circuits get wired to respond to stimulation, whether positive or negative, making calm feel dull, empty, or unsafe. The safety-first addiction is a paradox. While safety and calm are what your conscious mind craves, your subconscious clings to the heightened arousal of danger because that state once meant survival. The fight-or-flight responses, cortisol surges, and adrenaline releases became addictive. Neuroscience shows that chronic stress rewires the brain, sensitizing it to stress hormones and making the body crave that heightened state. This creates a cycle where peace becomes intolerable and chaos feels alive. This addiction can manifest in many ways. People might unconsciously seek out drama, conflict, or risky situations. They might sabotage peaceful moments or relationships, because tranquility triggers subconscious anxiety. It's why some individuals feel restless or bored in safe, stable environments, gravitating instead toward chaos that feels familiar, even if it's harmful. Consider the experience of veterans returning from combat zones. Many report feeling anxious or disconnected during quiet times, craving the adrenaline of danger despite consciously wanting peace. Their brains adapted to constant threat, and that hyperarousal becomes a kind of addiction, a safety-first paradox where safety feels unsafe because it lacks stimulation. Similarly, in everyday life, people growing up in unstable or traumatic homes may carry this addiction. They may unconsciously create chaos, through emotional outbursts, risky behaviors, or relationship conflicts, to recreate the neurochemical states their brains associate with survival and engagement. This pattern traps them in cycles of stress and instability, even when they long for peace. Breaking free from the safety-first addiction requires deep awareness and rewiring. Mindfulness practices help by teaching the brain to tolerate stillness and calm without triggering anxiety. Somatic therapies retrain the nervous system to recognize safety without stress responses. Over time, new neural pathways form, allowing peace to become genuinely restorative rather than threatening. Therapy, social support, and consistent safe environments are crucial. They provide the external reassurance the brain once lacked, allowing it to downshift from chronic hypervigilance. Learning to identify triggers that provoke restlessness or chaos-seeking behaviors empowers individuals to choose calm deliberately rather than reactively. The path is challenging because it asks you to embrace what once felt dangerous: silence, stillness, and stability. But in embracing peace, you reclaim your life from the grip of trauma and survival programming. You transform chaos addiction into a balanced appreciation for safety. Remember, your brain's craving for chaos was once a survival tool. Now, it can become a signal to heal and reset. The safety-first addiction is not a flaw, it's a message from your past. By listening, understanding, and nurturing calm, you break the cycle and find freedom in genuine peace. Your journey toward this freedom is a profound act of self-care and courage, a reclaiming of your right to feel safe, grounded, and whole. Peace is not the enemy, it's the sanctuary your brain longs to rediscover. The familiar pain magnet: you only experienced love as pain. That statement holds a haunting weight, capturing a deep and often hidden truth about how the human body and mind can become trapped in cycles of suffering. Not because pain is desired, but because it is known, familiar, and oddly comforting in its predictability. The familiar pain magnet is a powerful psychological and physiological phenomenon where the body, conditioned by early experiences of love entwined with hurt, begins to unconsciously seek out situations and relationships that replicate that pain. This happens not from a desire to suffer, but from a subconscious craving for the recognizable, the known emotional terrain that once defined what love felt like. Our brains and bodies are wired to seek safety and survival above all else. When love, one of the most fundamental human needs, becomes consistently associated with pain, rejection, or neglect, the nervous system encodes this pattern as normal. The early emotional wounds create neural pathways and physiological responses that become the blueprint for what the body expects from intimacy and connection. As strange as it seems, pain becomes a baseline emotional state. It is a magnet because it is familiar, even if it is harmful. Consider a child who grows up in a household where affection is tied to criticism or where care arrives only after conflict. The child learns that love and pain are intertwined, and the nervous system adapts to this reality. Later in life, this person may find themselves repeatedly drawn to partners or situations that recreate these patterns of hurt. The familiar pain magnet pulls them toward what feels emotionally recognizable, even when it causes suffering. This dynamic is a form of emotional conditioning, repetition that shapes the brain's expectations and emotional responses. This phenomenon can be seen in the paradoxical attachment to toxic relationships. People often ask, why would anyone stay with someone who causes them pain? The answer lies in the power of familiarity. The body craves what it knows because unfamiliar emotional states can feel unpredictable, unsafe, or frightening. Love untainted by pain is foreign, confusing, and sometimes perceived as fragile or unsustainable. Pain, by contrast, is a known landscape where the nervous system has learned to survive. The science behind this lies partly in the brain's reward system and the neurochemistry of attachment. When familiar patterns are repeated, even painful ones, the brain releases chemicals like dopamine and endorphins in response to the emotional highs and lows. This biochemical roller coaster can create a kind of addiction to the emotional intensity, reinforcing the magnetic pull toward familiar pain. The body's stress response, mediated by cortisol and adrenaline, becomes intertwined with the experience of love, further complicating the emotional imprint. Another layer is the role of the autonomic nervous system, which governs our fight, flight, or freeze responses. When love is experienced through pain, the nervous system often remains in a state of heightened alert or tension. Over time, this state becomes baseline. Chronic stress and hypervigilance become intertwined with attachment. The body unconsciously seeks to recreate this arousal state because it is familiar and feels like home, even if it is unhealthy. Examples abound in trauma survivors or individuals with attachment wounds rooted in early neglect or abuse. These individuals may find themselves drawn to relationships that echo their childhood emotional landscape. The familiar pain magnet is not a conscious choice but an automatic, physiological response based on years of conditioning. Breaking free requires rewiring these deeply ingrained neural pathways, a process that is painful but ultimately liberating. Healing begins with awareness, recognizing that the pain magnet is operating beneath conscious thought. Therapy modalities such as somatic experiencing, trauma-informed therapy, and attachment-based counseling help individuals reconnect with their bodies and identify when old pain patterns are triggering attraction to harmful dynamics. Mindfulness and self-compassion practices build new neural pathways that associate safety and love with peace rather than pain. Importantly, healing also involves creating new relational experiences that redefine love as a source of safety, joy, and stability. Safe, supportive relationships act as corrective emotional experiences, gradually diminishing the power of the familiar pain magnet. Over time, the nervous system learns new patterns of attachment, where love is no longer synonymous with suffering. This journey is neither quick nor easy. The pull of familiarity is strong because it is wired into the deepest layers of the brain and body. Yet, the possibility of redefining love beyond pain offers profound hope. You can teach your body and mind that love is not a painful trap but a sanctuary of connection, growth, and genuine belonging. Recognizing the familiar pain magnet in your life is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional freedom. It means choosing the unfamiliar, peace, authenticity, and unconditional acceptance, over the known but damaging cycles of hurt. It means trusting that love can be safe and healing, even if it feels foreign at first. In this understanding lies deep compassion for yourself and others caught in the magnet's pull. You are not broken for feeling drawn to pain. You are wired to survive and seek what you know. And with awareness, patience, and support, you can rewrite your emotional story, shifting from pain's magnet to love's true embrace. The completion validation loop. Your entire sense of worth has been quietly shaped by one relentless rule. You are only valuable when you finish things. From a young age, the praise came not for your efforts or your process, but for the neat, completed outcome. The trophy, the certificate, the finished project, the finish line was sacred. The journey itself was overlooked, undervalued, even feared. This is the essence of the completion validation loop, a psychological prison forged by external approval and internalized expectation. When praise hinges solely on completion, your brain learns to associate worth with productivity and measurable results. This wiring fosters a worship of productivity, a compulsive drive to finish, check off, and deliver. Every undone task becomes a silent accusation. You're not enough until you complete it. The act of finishing floods your brain with a surge of dopamine, the chemical of reward and validation. This addictive cycle traps you in a loop where worth depends on output, not experience. But this loop has a shadow side. Because if only completion brings value, what happens to the process? The messy, uncertain, often slow unfolding of growth. The process becomes something to fear, avoid, or rush through. It is stripped of joy and curiosity, replaced by anxiety and urgency. The moment you start a task, your nervous system bristles, because the pressure to finish looms like a ticking bomb. This fear of process fuels procrastination and perfectionism in equal measure. Perfectionism arises because unfinished work is unacceptable, and so only flawless completion will earn that fleeting validation. Procrastination creeps in because starting feels like stepping into a gauntlet where your worth hangs by a thread. The process becomes a battleground where the stakes are your identity. Rest, too, becomes a confusing enemy. If worth is tied to accomplishment, then stillness feels like failure. Rest is not relaxation, it is a guilty pause, a dangerous void threatening to erase your value. Your brain, conditioned to worship productivity, cannot settle in calm. The relentless inner voice whispers, "You should be doing something, finishing something, proving yourself." This makes rest feel like loss, not recovery. Consider the story of someone who never learned to enjoy the process. Every project is a race to the finish, every moment filled with tension and calculation. They push through exhaustion, sacrificing peace for performance. When they do finally rest, guilt consumes them. They feel lost, adrift, disconnected from themselves because their identity is so tightly wound around productivity. This cycle also blinds you to the richness of learning, creativity, and growth that happens in process. The brain's reward system, hijacked by the completion loop, fails to celebrate exploration, failure, or incremental progress. This narrows your emotional experience and stunts your personal evolution. The fullness of being present in the moment slips away under the shadow of the next deadline. Neurologically, this loop is reinforced by repeated dopamine hits tied to completion milestones. The ventral striatum, a key part of the reward circuit, lights up only when tasks are finished. The prefrontal cortex, which governs planning and decision-making, becomes wired to prioritize finishing over experiencing. The result is a brain that craves completion like a drug, desperately chasing validation. Breaking free from this loop requires rewiring these neural pathways. It begins with a radical shift, valuing process over product. Embracing the unfolding moment without judgment, without the pressure to perform or finish. This rewiring involves retraining your brain to reward the small steps, the effort, and the presence, not just the end result. Mindfulness practices can play a crucial role here. By grounding attention in the here and now, they soothe the anxious anticipation of deadlines. They invite you to witness your experience without rushing toward completion. Slowly, the brain learns that the process itself is safe, meaningful, and even rewarding. Therapeutic approaches that address perfectionism and procrastination help dismantle the fear of process. They teach you to tolerate uncertainty, to embrace imperfection, and to find value beyond visible outcomes. These interventions rewire the prefrontal cortex to balance planning with acceptance, motivation with self-compassion. Imagine a life where you honor both process and completion, where your worth flows from your presence and your effort, not just the finished product, where rest is sacred, a vital recharge that fuels creativity and growth. This is not a fantasy but a possibility within your reach. The completion validation loop is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism twisted by external expectations. It serves to keep you productive, but it steals your connection to flow, rest, and self-compassion. By recognizing this pattern, you can begin to rewrite your story. When you stop worshiping productivity and start embracing process, you reclaim your humanity. You learn that your value is not a scorecard of achievements but a living, breathing reality grounded in being. The reward becomes intrinsic, a quiet joy in simply showing up, doing your best, and allowing the unfolding to happen. This transformation is not easy. It asks you to confront years of conditioning and to challenge the core beliefs about worth and success. But the freedom on the other side is worth every step. Freedom to rest without guilt, to create without pressure, and to live without the endless chase for validation. Your nervous system, once trapped in the cycle of validation, can learn a new rhythm. A rhythm that honors both movement and stillness, process and completion, effort and ease. This balance rewires your brain for sustainable fulfillment rather than fleeting reward. The moment you begin to cherish the process, the cycle breaks. The fear dissolves. You no longer feel lost in rest, but find it restorative. You no longer worship productivity, but see it as one part of a larger, richer experience. This is the liberation waiting at the end of the completion validation loop. The liberation to live fully, freely, and deeply in every moment, not just when you cross the finish line. The achievement guilt not, when you achieve something remarkable, whether it's a promotion, a creative breakthrough, or simply stepping into your potential, there is often a rush of pride and validation. Yet, hidden beneath that pride can lie a knot of guilt so tangled and complex it can choke your joy. This is the achievement guilt knot, a real psychological conflict where success, instead of being celebrated, triggers feelings of shame, silence, or even resentment from those around you. When your achievements provoke envy or cause others to withdraw, you unconsciously learn to dim your own light, believing that shining brightly is a betrayal of the very people you care about. Imagine a young artist who finally sells their first painting. Instead of congratulations, they face awkward silence or subtle coldness from family or friends who feel threatened or left behind. Over time, this artist starts to hesitate, to downplay successes, to avoid mentioning achievements at all. The voice in their head begins whispering, "Maybe I shouldn't be so proud. Maybe my success hurts others. Maybe I'm selfish." This internal conflict becomes a knot of guilt tightening around their ambition, slowly dulling their drive and dimming their confidence. This knot forms because humans are deeply social creatures wired for belonging and acceptance. Our communities and families shape our sense of self-worth. When success creates a rift, even unconsciously, the emotional cost can be high. The brain starts associating achievement with social risk. The reward of recognition clashes with the pain of exclusion or envy. This creates a paradox. Your very growth threatens the relationships that give your life meaning. Psychological research shows that this phenomenon is common in families or cultures where collective harmony is prized above individual accomplishment. In such environments, shining too brightly can be seen as selfish or disruptive. Children learn early to mask ambition to avoid being labeled as arrogant or abandoning their roots. This internalized guilt may persist into adulthood, manifesting as self-sabotage, underachievement, or chronic anxiety about success. The achievement guilt knot is also fueled by empathy and deep emotional ties. When loved ones react with envy or silence, it hurts. The ache of seeing those you care about uncomfortable or distant creates a sense of responsibility for their feelings. This responsibility can morph into guilt, where your success feels less like your own victory and more like a burden you carry on behalf of others. This knot can manifest in various ways. Some hide their talents and downplay wins, while others might overwork themselves to earn acceptance or forgiveness. Still, others cycle through peaks of achievement followed by periods of self-doubt and retreat, trapped in the emotional tug-of-war between desire for success and fear of relational damage. Breaking free from the achievement guilt not requires acknowledging its roots without self-judgment. It means understanding that your worth and success are not betrayals but parts of your unique path. Healing involves setting boundaries, redefining success on your terms, and nurturing relationships that celebrate rather than resent growth. Therapeutic work often focuses on disentangling these knots through self-compassion, reframing success, and confronting the fears beneath guilt. This journey is intensely personal and sometimes painful, as it challenges deep-seated beliefs about belonging, love, and identity. Yet, the reward is profound. Releasing the achievement guilt knot opens the door to authentic fulfillment, allowing you to shine fully without fear. It invites a new story where your success uplifts both you and those around you, transforming envy and silence into shared joy and pride. Remember, your light is not a betrayal but a beacon. In embracing your achievements, you offer others permission to do the same. The knot may have formed from others' shadows, but it does not have to define your brightness or your path forward. The downplay reflex bias. You learned early on that minimizing your needs earned more affection, that being quiet about what you truly wanted or felt made you safer in a world that rewarded modesty and punished assertion. This conditioning forms what we can call the downplay reflex bias, a deep, often unconscious habit of shrinking yourself, downplaying your desires, and dimming your presence to avoid conflict, rejection, or punishment disguised as praise. From childhood, many people are taught to be modest, to not ask for too much, to take only what you need, or even be seen and not heard. At face value, these lessons sound like virtues, but beneath them lies a powerful bias that teaches you to hide parts of yourself in order to gain approval. This bias says, your true needs are too much. To be loved, you must make yourself smaller. Over time, your brain internalizes this message, and it begins to automatically downplay your importance and desires before anyone else has to. Neurologically, this is linked to the brain's reward and fear systems. When you express needs or desires that were previously met with dismissal, criticism, or punishment, your amygdala encodes those as threats. To reduce the risk of emotional pain, your brain develops a reflexive habit. Before you even speak or act, you downplay or hide your needs. This reflex becomes automatic and self-reinforcing because it temporarily reduces conflict and gains social acceptance, even though it erodes your sense of self. The downplay reflex bias also distorts your internal narrative. You start believing that your needs are less important or even wrong. You might tell yourself, I don't really need that, or I'm asking too much. This internal silence breeds resentment, frustration, and a disconnection from your authentic self. Over time, it can lead to feelings of invisibility and worthlessness, because you have conditioned yourself to believe that your true needs must be concealed to be acceptable. In practical terms, this bias manifests in many ways. You might say yes when you want to say no, avoid asking for help, or minimize your accomplishments when praised. In relationships, you may hide your feelings to keep the peace or avoid burdening others. Professionally, you might understate your contributions or avoid advocating for promotions and raises. This automatic downplaying keeps you small and unseen, limiting your growth and fulfillment. Consider the example of someone raised in a family where expressing anger or disappointment was met with harsh judgment or silence. To survive emotionally, they learned to downplay those feelings, telling themselves and others that everything was fine. As adults, they may struggle to assert boundaries or express true emotions, fearing that doing so will trigger rejection. Their downplay reflex bias is a protective shield but also a prison that keeps authentic connection at bay. This bias also feeds into social dynamics where modesty is prized but often weaponized. For instance, in workplaces or social groups, people who downplay their needs may be overlooked for opportunities, while those who assert themselves are seen as aggressive or selfish. This double bind reinforces the habit of self-minimization and can perpetuate systemic inequities, especially for those already marginalized. Healing the downplay reflex bias begins with awareness. Recognizing when you are minimizing your needs is the first step toward reclaiming your voice. This requires honest self-reflection and compassion, understanding that this habit formed as a survival mechanism, not a character flaw. Journaling, therapy, and mindfulness can help surface these patterns and create space for new ways of relating to yourself. Building assertiveness skills is another key part of healing. Assertiveness is not about aggression or entitlement, but about honoring your needs with respect and clarity. It's about learning to say no without guilt, ask for what you want without fear, and accept that your needs are valid and deserving of attention. Over time, practicing assertiveness rewires the brain's response to expressing needs, reducing the fear and increasing confidence. Another powerful antidote is cultivating self-compassion. When you treat yourself kindly and acknowledge your worth, you weaken the internalized messages that say your needs are too much. Self-compassion activates brain areas associated with safety and reduces the threat response, creating a fertile ground for authentic self-expression. Creating supportive environments is also crucial. Surrounding yourself with people who respect and encourage your authentic needs helps retrain your brain's social reward system. Positive reinforcement for honest expression replaces the old punishment-based patterns with new, healthier ones. Ultimately, overcoming the downplay reflex bias is an act of reclaiming your full humanity. It is learning to stand tall in your needs and desires without shame or fear. It is about dismantling the false modesty that demands your silence and embracing a bold, authentic presence. This transformation opens the door to deeper connections, greater fulfillment, and a life lived with integrity and courage. You are not too much. Your needs are real and worthy. By stepping out of the shadow of the downplay reflex bias, you reclaim your voice, your power, and your place in the world. The invisible child blueprint. You became hyper-independent because no one noticed your needs. Now asking for help feels like a weakness, not a skill. This pattern I call the invisible child blueprint is rooted deeply in early experiences where your cries, whether silent or loud, went unheard or were dismissed. As a child, when your needs were overlooked or invalidated, your subconscious adapted by turning inward. You learned that relying on yourself was the safest path, that vulnerability was dangerous, and that asking for support risked rejection or further invisibility. Over time, this blueprint hardwired a false belief that independence equals survival and dependence equals weakness. In environments where emotional neglect, or even subtle indifference prevailed, the child who could manage alone was more likely to be seen, or at least less likely to be a burden. The nervous system, ever adaptive, took this lesson as truth and cemented hyper-independence as a defense mechanism. It's not simply a choice but an ingrained survival strategy, where self-sufficiency became a shield against the pain of being ignored. Psychologically, this blueprint manifests as reluctance or fear around asking for help. The inner voice may whisper that needing others makes you less worthy or strong. This can lead to overwhelming loneliness, exhaustion, and the heavy burden of carrying too much alone. The fear of being seen as needy or vulnerable paradoxically keeps you isolated, even when connection is desperately desired. Consider the adult who never learned to trust that their needs would be met. They might push away offers of assistance, refuse to delegate, or mask struggles with a stoic facade. Yet beneath this exterior often lies a longing for acknowledgement and support. The invisible child blueprint convinces them that independence is the only way to avoid disappointment, but it also keeps true intimacy at bay. Therapeutically, breaking this pattern requires cultivating a new relationship with vulnerability. Learning that asking for help is a strength, not a weakness, unlocks access to support and connection. Practices like compassionate self-inquiry and safe relational experiences teach the brain to trust that dependence can be reciprocal and healing. In time, the blueprint softens, revealing that independence and interdependence coexist. You can stand strong and still lean on others. You can honor your needs without fear of judgment. This transformation is a reclaiming of your humanity, a release from the lonely script of the invisible child blueprint, and a step toward authentic connection and self-compassion. The intensity conditioning trap. Only extreme emotions got attention growing up, so now dull moments feel empty, and emotional stability feels wrong. This statement reveals a deep psychological truth about how our early emotional environment shapes not just what we feel, but how we perceive the value of our feelings and even our very sense of self. When childhood is marked by cycles of intense highs and lows, where only shouting, crying, or dramatic displays provoke notice, the nervous system becomes conditioned to equate emotional intensity with significance. Over time, this conditioning forms what we might call the intensity conditioning trap, where calm, peaceful, or stable emotional states feel unfamiliar, flat, or even wrong. The brain and body crave extremes because that is where they learned attention and connection exist. Imagine growing up in a household where love, communication, or safety only appeared amidst emotional storms. A child learns that only outbursts, crises, or passionate conflicts bring interaction or care. Quiet moments pass unnoticed or are filled with silence, neglect, or emotional numbness. The nervous system adapts by heightening its sensitivity to emotional extremes and tuning out low-key feelings. In adulthood, this rewiring manifests as an addiction to emotional drama. Without intense feelings, whether anger, sadness, excitement, or anxiety, life feels dull, hollow, or meaningless. Emotional stability, which others may seek, is experienced as boredom or emptiness. Neuroscience sheds light on this phenomenon through understanding how the brain's reward and arousal systems operate. The limbic system, responsible for emotion, reacts strongly to high arousal states, releasing neurotransmitters like dopamine and adrenaline that signal salience and importance. When attention and care in childhood are tied exclusively to such states, the brain learns to seek these chemical surges as markers of safety and belonging. The absence of these surges, as in calm or neutral emotional states, can trigger feelings of restlessness, anxiety, or dissatisfaction. This trap also affects self-regulation and identity. Individuals conditioned in this way may unconsciously provoke or escalate emotional situations to re-enter the zone of intensity where they feel most alive or seen. They might gravitate toward relationships or environments marked by volatility because these reproduce the emotional landscape they know. The paradox is that while extreme emotions bring attention, they also cause exhaustion, instability, and fragmented identity. The constant cycling between emotional peaks and troughs can leave a person feeling out of control or disconnected from their authentic self. Examples of this dynamic appear often in people who grew up in chaotic or neglectful homes. Some describe feeling invisible unless they are being heard through loud emotions. Others admit to stirring conflict or drama because peace feels unfamiliar or threatening. Even in moments of calm, they might feel a gnawing urge to wake up their feelings with tension or crisis. The intensity conditioning trap thus becomes a form of emotional addiction, with highs providing fleeting relief from the flatness of emotional stability. Breaking free from this trap requires rewiring both brain and body through consistent exposure to calm, safety, and validation of stable emotional states. Therapeutic approaches like dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness, and trauma-informed care help individuals develop tolerance for low arousal feelings and recognize their value. Mindfulness in particular teaches noticing and accepting subtle emotions without judgment or the need to amplify them. This cultivates new neural pathways where peace and stability are associated with safety, belonging, and self-worth. Healing also involves cultivating relationships and environments that reward emotional balance rather than extremes. Supportive connections that respond with gentle attention and steady presence reinforce the new emotional template. Over time, the nervous system learns that calm is not emptiness but a foundation for resilience and authentic connection. It is important to understand that the intensity conditioning trap is not a moral failing or a character flaw. It is a survival adaptation formed in response to early experiences of neglect, inconsistency, or trauma. Compassion toward oneself and patience in the healing process are essential. Changing deeply wired emotional habits takes time and gentle persistence. This trap can be viewed as a call to reclaim emotional wholeness, a journey from chaotic extremes to balanced presence. It invites embracing the full spectrum of feeling, from the quiet whispers of contentment to the powerful waves of passion. Emotional stability is not dullness, it is the fertile ground from which authentic life and true connection grow. Recognizing that dull moments feel empty because of conditioning opens the door to curiosity about what stable emotions really are and how they feel when allowed to surface. It means unlearning the belief that only intensity matters and rediscovering the richness of subtle feelings. It means valuing the steady rhythms of everyday life as meaningful rather than empty. Ultimately, the intensity conditioning trap teaches us about the profound impact of early emotional environments on adult life. It highlights how attention and care shape what we seek emotionally and how we define ourselves. But it also holds hope. With awareness, practice, and support, it is possible to break the cycle and find peace and stability, transforming what once felt wrong into a source of strength, balance, and deep fulfillment. The defensive listening reflex. Your ears may be hearing words, but your mind is not truly listening. Instead, it's locked in survival mode, always scanning, interpreting, preparing to defend or counterattack. This is the defensive listening reflex, a deeply ingrained pattern that transforms every conversation into a battlefield, every word into a potential threat, even when the speaker's intention is kindness. It's a reflex born from past wounds, trauma, and conditioning that rewired your nervous system to survive, but now traps you in a prison of suspicion and disconnection. From childhood, many learn that listening is not a neutral act. It is a skill honed not to understand, but to protect. Perhaps harsh words, criticism, or unpredictable reactions conditioned you to brace for impact. You learned to parse the subtext, to read between the lines, and to anticipate the next move. Compliments, instead of landing softly, bounce off the shield of doubt. Praise feels suspicious, because you've learned that even kind words can carry hidden intentions, veiled threats, or strings attached. Neurologically, this reflex is rooted in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, perpetually on high alert. When someone speaks, your brain instantly evaluates. Is this safe? Is this an attack? Should I respond or defend? This rapid-fire assessment bypasses the slower, more reasoned processes of the prefrontal cortex. The result is reactive listening, a mode that prioritizes survival over connection. Imagine being in a conversation where someone says, "You did a great job." For many, this lands as a warm affirmation, a boost to confidence. But for you, it may trigger internal whispers. What do they really mean? Are they mocking? Is there a catch? Your nervous system is scanning for danger even in praise. Compliments become double-edged swords, impossible to accept without suspicion. This reflex creates a vicious cycle. Because you listen defensively, your responses are guarded, clipped, or even hostile. Others sense the distance or resistance and may respond with frustration or withdrawal. This feeds your suspicion, confirming your internal narrative that words are weapons, not bridges. The cycle repeats, reinforcing your guarded listening and deepening isolation. The defensive listening reflex also distorts your own communication. You might struggle to express yourself authentically, fearing your words will be twisted or used against you. You may default to terse or guarded speech, limiting vulnerability and true connection. This creates a lonely echo chamber where real understanding becomes rare. Breaking this reflex is not about simply listening better. It requires rewiring your nervous system's fundamental response to spoken words. This begins with recognizing the reflex itself, seeing when your brain flips into survival mode instead of open awareness. Awareness creates a space, a momentary pause where you can choose to respond differently. Therapeutic practices like mindfulness meditation help by training attention and calming the amygdala's alarms. When you bring mindful awareness to conversations, you start to hear words without immediate judgment or suspicion. You learn to hold space for uncertainty instead of rushing to conclusions. Building trust also rewires this reflex. Consistent, safe interactions where words are reliably kind and supportive teach your brain that language can be gentle, not threatening. Over time, your amygdala lowers its guard, and the prefrontal cortex regains its role in thoughtful listening and interpretation. Practice in vulnerable conversations helps too. Sharing your fears about listening and asking for patience creates new neural pathways of safety. You experience connection instead of threat. Compliments become gifts, no longer riddled with suspicion. This transformation is hard because it challenges deep survival mechanisms. Your brain's priority was always to keep you safe, not to make you vulnerable. But in today's world, true safety arises from connection, empathy, and authentic listening, not from constant defense. Imagine a life where compliments land softly and are accepted with gratitude. where conversations feel like invitations rather than battles, where you listen with openness, curiosity, and presence. This life is possible, but only when the defensive listening reflex loosens its grip. Your nervous system can learn a new way. It can shift from threat detection to attunement, from defense to empathy. This rewiring transforms not just your conversations, but your relationships and sense of belonging. The defensive listening reflex is a shadow cast by past pain, but it does not have to define your future. By cultivating awareness, trust, and vulnerability, you can break free from this cycle. You can turn listening from a defense into a gift, both for yourself and for those around you. In this new way of listening, you reclaim your voice and your heart. You open to the world not as a battlefield but as a space for connection. The compliments, the criticisms, the silences, they all become parts of a dialogue rooted in safety, honesty, and deep human understanding. The emotional vault program equals if your emotions were once used against you, twisted into weapons by those meant to protect or love you, your brain responds with a survival strategy so profound it reshapes your entire inner world. This is what we can call the emotional vault program, an automatic, unconscious process where your mind locks away painful feelings in hidden vaults, creating a protective barrier between your conscious self and the rawness of your experience. But in doing so, it also buries the keys, leaving you disconnected from essential parts of yourself, unable to access feelings that once defined your humanity. Imagine the child who cried but was punished for tears, who expressed fear but was shamed for weakness. To survive, the brain adapts, forming secret chambers deep inside, places where emotions are sealed and guarded fiercely. These vaults hold not just sadness or anger but also love, joy, and hope, locked away because the risk of exposure seemed too great. Over time, you forget where these keys lie, how to open these emotional chambers, and you start living a life filtered through numbness or detachment. This process is not a flaw but a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. Neuroscience reveals that when emotions are repeatedly met with threat, neglect, or manipulation, the brain activates dissociative responses. The hippocampus and amygdala, central to memory and emotion, coordinate this protective shutdown. The brain prioritizes safety over feeling, creating vaults where memories and emotions are fragmented, out of reach from everyday awareness. The cost of this program is profound. When emotions are locked away, they don't vanish. They accumulate pressure like water behind a dam. You may feel disconnected from your own desires or overwhelmed by unexplainable anxiety or sadness. Emotional numbness, a lack of empathy, or difficulties in relationships often trace back to these sealed vaults. You become a stranger to your own emotional landscape, longing for connection yet trapped by barriers you can't see. Consider survivors of emotional abuse or trauma who describe feeling hollow or shut down. They may have no conscious memory of certain events or emotions, yet those feelings influence their behavior, relationships, and sense of self in subtle and persistent ways. The emotional vault program protects, but it also isolates, creating paradoxes where safety and pain coexist invisibly. Reclaiming access to these locked emotions requires a journey of patience, courage, and often professional support. Therapeutic approaches like trauma-informed therapy, somatic experiencing, or guided mindfulness help gently locate these vaults and find the lost keys. This process is intense and deeply compelling because it involves reawakening parts of yourself long hidden, facing pain safely, and learning to hold feelings without being overwhelmed. This unlocking is transformative. When you begin to open these vaults, you rediscover the full spectrum of your humanity, the love you stored away, the grief you silenced, the hope you feared to claim. Emotional reconnection fosters healing, self-compassion, and authenticity. It reconnects you with your story and empowers you to rewrite the narratives shaped by past wounds. The Emotional Vault program also helps explain why some people feel stuck or numb despite outward success or loving relationships. Without access to the keys, true emotional intimacy remains elusive. Understanding this mechanism invites empathy for yourself and others, recognizing that numbness or detachment is often a sign of deep survival rather than weakness or failure. In daily life, you may notice signs of locked emotions in moments of unexpected anger, sudden tears, or profound emptiness. These are whispers from the vaults, reminders that the keys are still inside you, waiting to be found. Listening to these signals with kindness rather than judgment is the first step toward healing. Ultimately, the Emotional Vault program reveals the complexity of human resilience and fragility. It shows how the brain strives to protect us, sometimes at great emotional cost, and how healing is a process of gently reclaiming what was hidden. The keys to your emotions may feel lost, but they are never gone. With awareness and courage, you can unlock your emotional vaults and step into a fuller, richer experience of life. The outer compass syndrome, when every choice you made had to please someone else, your own compass, the internal guidance system that once directed your desires, decisions, and sense of self, began to erode. This is what we call the outer compass syndrome. It's a profound shift where the instinct to choose for yourself fades away, replaced instead by a relentless need to satisfy others, and the confusing sensation that guilt is the voice of your own guidance. From a young age, many of us learn that love, approval, and safety depend on meeting the expectations of others: parents, teachers, peers, society. This conditional acceptance teaches the brain to prioritize external approval over internal truth. Every decision, whether small or life-changing, is filtered through the lens of, will this please them? Will I be punished or rejected if I say no? Over time, your brain's internal navigation system becomes recalibrated, relying less on your own feelings and values and more on the fluctuating demands of those around you. Neurologically, this syndrome manifests in a rewiring of brain circuits related to decision-making and emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex, which helps weigh options and anticipate outcomes, becomes dominated by the fear-based signals from the amygdala about potential social rejection or conflict. The ventral striatum, associated with reward, responds not to authentic satisfaction but to moments of external validation. This dynamic fosters a kind of learned helplessness, where you lose touch with your own preferences and become a reactive agent of others' desires. The outer compass syndrome also distorts your emotional experience. Guilt, originally a social emotion that helps maintain harmony, becomes internalized and magnified. You start to mistake guilt for guidance, believing that if a choice makes you feel guilty, it must be wrong, or worse, that avoiding guilt is the highest good. This confusion suppresses authentic desire and muddles clarity, leaving you paralyzed or perpetually conflicted. You may endlessly rationalize decisions to avoid guilt rather than pursue what truly aligns with your values. Consider an example: a person who grew up in a family where dissent was punished or where pleasing others was equated with being a good child. As an adult, they may struggle to make choices independently. Even simple decisions, what to eat, how to spend time, which career to pursue, are overshadowed by worry about disappointing others. Their inner voice is drowned out by the echo of others' expectations. When they do try to assert their preferences, guilt floods in, making them question their own right to choose. This syndrome also fuels codependency and low self-esteem. When your sense of worth hinges on pleasing others, your boundaries become porous and weak. You may find yourself overcommitting, neglecting self-care, or engaging in people-pleasing behaviors that ultimately erode your well-being. The more you lose connection with your own compass, the more you seek external approval, creating a vicious cycle that's hard to break. Socially, the outer compass syndrome limits authentic relationships. When you cannot express your true feelings or needs, connections become superficial or imbalanced. You may feel lonely or misunderstood, even while surrounded by others. Authentic intimacy requires mutual vulnerability and honesty, which is impossible if your choices are always filtered through an external lens. Healing from this syndrome starts with reclaiming your internal compass. The first step is cultivating awareness, recognizing when you are making decisions based on others' expectations rather than your own desires. Mindfulness practices can help by tuning you into your bodily sensations and emotional responses, which are the raw data of your authentic self. Notice where you feel tension, excitement, or peace when contemplating choices. Next is learning to distinguish guilt from intuition. Guilt often carries a heavy, constricting energy that seeks to control or punish, while true guidance feels clear, calm, and steady. When guilt arises, ask yourself, is this feeling arising from my own values, or is it a conditioned response to anticipated judgment? Journaling or therapy can support this differentiation and help unravel complex emotional knots. Rebuilding decision-making confidence requires small acts of autonomy. Start by making minor choices that honor your preferences, even if they contradict expectations. Celebrate these victories to strengthen your trust in yourself. Over time, expand this practice to bigger life decisions, gradually shifting your brain's reward system to respond to authenticity rather than approval. Setting boundaries is another vital step. Boundaries protect your emerging self from being overridden by others' demands. They allow you to say no without guilt and yes because you want to, not because you feel obliged. Practicing clear communication and self-respect fosters healthier relationships and reinforces your inner compass. Remember, healing outer compass syndrome is not about selfishness but about balance. It's about aligning your actions with your truth while respecting others. When your internal guidance is clear and strong, your interactions become more genuine and fulfilling, and guilt loses its confusing power. To conclude, the outer compass syndrome is a silent thief of autonomy, replacing your innate ability to choose with a dependence on external approval and a mistaken identification of guilt as guidance. This condition limits your freedom, clouds your clarity, and erodes your authentic self. Yet, it is reversible. With awareness, self-compassion, and practice, you can reclaim your inner compass, learn to navigate life by your own truth, and step into a life of freedom, integrity, and genuine connection. You are not here to please others at the cost of losing yourself. Your choices matter because you matter. Trust your inner compass. It has always been there, waiting for you to listen. The image projection cage. You became what others expected, until your real self starved behind the mask, screaming in silence. This is the haunting reality of the image projection cage, a psychological prison forged from the relentless pressure to meet external expectations. From an early age, many of us are taught, subtly or overtly, that to be loved, accepted, or valued, we must conform to the roles others assign us. Whether it's the perfect child, the dependable friend, the high achiever, or the quiet supporter, these images become our identity's facade, a carefully constructed mask designed to gain approval and avoid rejection. The problem with living behind this mask is that it demands the suppression of your true feelings, desires, and complexities. The authentic self, the messy, imperfect, vibrant core, is forced into invisibility, starved of expression and nourishment. Over time, this silent starvation creates an inner void, a profound loneliness masked by the carefully maintained exterior. The mind learns to equate survival with compliance, and the heart suffers in silence. Neurologically, this process involves dissociation, where parts of your identity split off to fulfill different roles. The image you project is heavily rehearsed, practiced to meet the expectations of family, society, or culture. Meanwhile, your authentic self, unable to safely emerge, retreats into the shadows. This fragmentation can lead to anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of being disconnected from oneself. Consider the person who always says yes to avoid conflict or rejection, who hides their true opinions to keep peace, or who overachieves to earn love. On the outside, they appear successful, confident, and composed. On the inside, they feel hollow, exhausted, and trapped. Their true voice remains unheard, their true needs unmet. Breaking free from the image projection cage requires courage to face the fears of rejection and abandonment. It involves peeling back layers of conditioning to rediscover the authentic self beneath the masks. Therapeutic approaches such as psychodynamic therapy, mindfulness, and expressive arts facilitate this process by creating safe spaces to explore and express suppressed aspects of identity. As you reclaim your true self, you may experience discomfort, as the image that once protected you falls away. But this shedding is necessary for genuine freedom. The real self, once nourished, blossoms into wholeness, creativity, and authentic connection. You begin to live not for others' approval but in alignment with your inner truth. The image projection cage is a call to release the masks, to listen to the silent screams of your authentic self, and to nurture it back to life. In doing so, you escape the prison of expectations and embrace the liberating truth that your worth lies not in the image you project, but in the real you, unmasked, unapologetic, and fully alive. The repetition familiarity bias. Your brain repeats behaviors it's seen, regardless of logic, because what's repeated is safer than what's unknown. This simple truth underpins much of human behavior and decision-making, revealing a profound cognitive bias known as the repetition familiarity bias. Deep within the neural architecture of your brain lies a powerful preference for what is familiar. This bias is not just a psychological quirk, it is an evolutionary adaptation designed to maximize survival by favoring known patterns over uncertain or novel situations. The paradox is that this bias often overrides rational thought, leading you to repeat behaviors and choices that may no longer serve you, or that may even be harmful, simply because they are known and thus perceived as safer. From infancy, your brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It constantly scans the environment, identifies regularities, and builds mental models based on repeated experiences. This process forms the foundation of learning and memory, enabling you to predict outcomes and respond quickly without having to reassess every detail. The repetition familiarity bias is a natural extension of this mechanism. When faced with choices, your brain favors actions it has seen before, even when the logic behind those actions is weak or absent. This bias reduces cognitive load and emotional uncertainty, providing a sense of control and stability in an unpredictable world. Consider a simple example: someone stuck in a toxic relationship. Rationally, they may recognize the harm and want to leave, but their brain clings to familiar patterns of interaction. The arguments, apologies, and reconciliations form a loop that feels safe because it is known, while the uncertainty of separation or change feels threatening. This repetition familiarity bias keeps them cycling through behaviors that maintain the status quo, even if it causes pain. Neuroscientifically, this bias is rooted in the brain's reward and habit systems. The basal ganglia, a group of nuclei involved in habit formation, encodes repeated behaviors as automatic routines, making them effortless and habitual. When a behavior is repeated, dopamine release reinforces the neural pathways associated with that behavior, creating a feedback loop that strengthens the preference for familiarity. Even if the initial behavior was learned in a context that is no longer relevant, or if it is harmful, the brain's wiring makes it difficult to break free because the pathways have been deeply entrenched. Another key player is the amygdala, which governs emotional responses, especially fear and threat detection. The amygdala signals caution toward novel or unknown stimuli, triggering stress responses that bias decision-making toward familiar options. This emotional tagging of novelty as potential danger further anchors the repetition familiarity bias by prioritizing safety over innovation. This bias also explains why people often revert to familiar coping mechanisms under stress, even if those mechanisms are ineffective or destructive. For example, someone dealing with anxiety might repeatedly engage in avoidance behaviors or substance use because these responses are known and thus feel safer than confronting the unknown sources of distress. The repetition familiarity bias limits flexibility and creativity in problem-solving, trapping individuals in cycles that hinder growth and healing. The bias extends beyond personal behavior to social and cultural patterns. Societies cling to traditions and rituals, sometimes resisting change despite evidence that adaptation is necessary. On an individual level, cognitive biases such as confirmation bias and status quo bias are manifestations of the repetition familiarity bias, favoring information and choices that reinforce existing beliefs and behaviors. Breaking free from the repetition familiarity bias requires conscious effort and often structured intervention. Awareness is the first step, recognizing that your brain's preference for repetition is an unconscious survival strategy, not a rational choice. Mindfulness and metacognitive practices help create space between impulse and action, allowing observation of habitual patterns without automatic enactment. Therapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and habit reversal training target the neural circuits involved, encouraging new behaviors and thought patterns to replace old ones. Repeated practice of new, healthier behaviors gradually rewires the brain, weakening the dominance of familiar but unhelpful patterns. Creating a supportive environment that encourages safe exploration of novelty is also crucial. When new experiences are framed as manageable and rewarding rather than threatening, the amygdala's fear response diminishes, and the brain becomes more open to change. Small, incremental steps toward unfamiliar behaviors reduce anxiety and build confidence, slowly shifting the neural bias. It is important to remember that the repetition familiarity bias is not inherently negative. It provides stability and efficiency, allowing you to function without constantly reinventing every action. The challenge lies in balancing this bias with openness to growth and adaptation. Learning to tolerate uncertainty and embrace change is essential for personal development. In conclusion, the repetition familiarity bias reveals how deeply your brain is wired to seek safety in the known, sometimes at the cost of logic and well-being. It highlights the tension between survival instincts and conscious choice. Understanding this bias empowers you to recognize when repetition serves you and when it traps you, opening the path toward intentional transformation and freedom from automatic cycles. Embracing the unknown may feel risky, but it holds the potential for growth, healing, and authentic living beyond the comfortable chains of familiarity. The fixer-control response. You learned early that love was something to be earned, not freely given. In this silent contract, your way in was to fix others' problems, fix their moods, fix the chaos around you. The role of the fixer became your identity, your survival strategy, and your currency for connection. But beneath this tireless effort lies a hidden cost. You began carrying burdens that were never yours to bear, solving problems that were never truly yours. Fixing is seductive. It offers a sense of control in an unpredictable world. When chaos threatens, stepping in to solve becomes a way to calm not just others, but your own inner storm. Your nervous system finds relief in action. The frantic dance of problem-solving floods your brain with dopamine, the reward chemical signaling, you are valuable. You are needed. Yet, this relief is temporary and incomplete. The deeper truth is that by fixing others, you subtly deny them the chance to grow, to fail, to take responsibility. You inadvertently send the message that they cannot handle their own struggles, and you reinforce your own need to be indispensable. This dynamic creates a toxic loop where your sense of worth is tethered to other people's problems, and their autonomy is diminished. Consider the person who always rushes to solve a friend's emotional crisis. They take on the role of the counselor, the mediator, the problem solver. Their love language is action, doing, fixing, rescuing. But when the friend finally needs space to process or stumble, the fixer feels anxious and compelled to intervene. Their nervous system is wired to jump into control mode, because control feels safer than uncertainty. This response often masks deeper fears. Fear of rejection, fear of being invisible, fear of losing connection if they are not needed. The fixer believes that if they stop fixing, love will vanish. So, they clutch problems like lifelines, even when these problems weigh heavily on their heart and mind. The nervous system adapts to this pattern with subtle but profound changes. The stress response remains activated as the fixer constantly scans for issues to resolve. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises with the pressure to maintain control and fix what is broken. Over time, this chronic stress damages emotional resilience and leads to burnout. This pattern can also distort relationships. The fixer may feel resentful or exhausted, while the other person may feel infantilized or controlled. Boundaries blur as the fixer assumes responsibility beyond their scope. The paradox is clear. By trying to preserve love through control, both parties lose freedom, spontaneity, and authentic connection. Breaking free from the fixer control response demands courage and self-awareness. It requires recognizing when you are taking on problems that belong to others, and having the strength to step back. This is not abandonment, but a radical act of love, allowing others to face their challenges and grow in their own time. Therapeutic support, mindfulness, and boundary setting are crucial tools. Mindfulness helps the fixer observe their impulse to control without immediately acting on it. Setting clear boundaries protects emotional energy and clarifies roles in relationships. Therapy can uncover the roots of the fixer identity and foster healthier patterns of connection. Imagine the freedom in releasing the need to fix. You begin to love not by solving, but by witnessing, supporting, and trusting. You discover that love does not require control, but thrives in acceptance. Your nervous system learns to find safety not in action, but in presence. This transformation rewires the brain. The prefrontal cortex gains strength in regulating impulses, allowing you to respond rather than react. The amygdala's alarms quiet as you learn to tolerate uncertainty and vulnerability in yourself and others. By relinquishing the fixer role, you reclaim your own emotional space. You stop carrying invisible burdens that drain your vitality. You open the door to genuine connection, where love is not a reward for labor but a foundation of being. The fixer control response is a survival skill transformed into a trap. But survival skills can evolve. Your brain, your heart, your nervous system all hold the capacity to grow beyond old patterns. Choose presence over control. Choose trust over fixing. Choose love that flows freely, not earned by deeds but offered in fullness. Your liberation awaits beyond the fixer control response. Step into it with courage, and watch how relationships, and your own spirit, flourish in the light of authentic connection. The conflict avoidance algorithm. If conflict meant pain, rejection, or chaos in your early experiences, your brain quietly rewired itself to survive by agreeing, appeasing, or disappearing entirely. This is what we call the conflict avoidance algorithm, a deeply embedded survival strategy where your sense of self becomes secondary to maintaining peace at any cost. Over time, this rewiring can turn into self-erasure, where you lose sight of your own needs, desires, and boundaries in a desperate effort to avoid discord. It's a powerful, often invisible force shaping your behavior and relationships, rooted in a primal need for safety. Imagine a child growing up in a home where conflict triggered anger, withdrawal, or punishment. The child quickly learns that speaking up or disagreeing leads to harm, so the brain adapts. Agreeing becomes safer than arguing, appeasing quieter than resisting, and vanishing emotionally more protective than risking exposure. This neurological and psychological pattern becomes a default operating system, silently guiding choices and reactions long after the original threats have faded. Neuroscience shows that the brain's threat detection systems, the amygdala and limbic regions, are highly sensitive to social conflict because, evolutionarily, social bonds meant survival. When conflict consistently signals danger, the brain initiates coping responses to reduce perceived threats. This can include suppressing anger, masking true feelings, or withdrawing entirely to maintain fragile peace. The conflict avoidance algorithm is this survival circuitry in action, prioritizing harmony over authenticity. But the cost is profound. Self-erasure, born from conflict avoidance, can lead to chronic feelings of emptiness, resentment, and disconnection. When your true thoughts and feelings are consistently silenced, you lose connection with your inner world. Boundaries blur, and your identity fragments, as your self becomes defined by the needs and moods of others. Over time, this can manifest in depression, anxiety, or a pervasive sense of invisibility. In relationships, this algorithm can create an exhausting cycle. You suppress your voice to keep peace, but unspoken needs and frustrations build pressure. Eventually, they may erupt in unexpected ways, or you might silently withdraw, leaving partners or friends confused and disconnected. The paradox is that the peace maintained on the surface masks inner turmoil, a quiet war waged behind smiles and agreements. This pattern is reinforced by cultural or familial messages valuing self-sacrifice, politeness, or emotional restraint. You may have been taught that disagreeing is rude or that your needs are less important than others. These beliefs cement the conflict avoidance algorithm deeper into your psyche, making change feel risky or impossible. Breaking free from this algorithm requires awareness and courage. It starts with recognizing moments when you choose peace over truth and understanding the cost of that choice. Therapeutic approaches such as assertiveness training, boundary setting, and trauma-informed therapy help retrain the brain, gradually loosening the grip of automatic conflict avoidance. This process is intense and compelling because it asks you to face fears long buried, the fear of rejection, anger, or abandonment. But within this challenge lies profound growth. Reclaiming your voice is not about creating conflict, but about honoring your authentic self, fostering honest relationships, and experiencing peace that includes, rather than erases, your true feelings. Understanding the conflict avoidance algorithm also cultivates empathy. When you meet others who shrink, agree, or vanish, you recognize the survival behind their silence. Compassion replaces frustration, opening pathways for deeper connection and healing. In daily life, watch for signs of this algorithm in yourself: automatic agreement, hiding opinions, discomfort with disagreement, or exhaustion after social interactions. These are clues to unconscious survival wiring at work. Pausing and asking, "What do I really feel? What do I need?" can begin the journey toward self-reclamation. Ultimately, the conflict avoidance algorithm is a testament to human adaptability and the cost of survival. It shows how the brain prioritizes safety, but also how healing involves courageously reclaiming the self lost in the quest for peace. When you unlock this pattern, you step into a life where peace is not self-erasure but authentic coexistence, where your voice matters, and harmony includes your truth. The burnout identity link. You tied your value to how much you could endure, learning early that strength meant pushing beyond limits, that perseverance was the measure of your worth. This created a powerful and insidious connection between your identity and exhaustion, forming what we call the burnout identity link. In this pattern, feeling exhausted is not merely a physical state but a warped validation, a proof that you are enough because you have endured so much, suffered so deeply, and kept going against all odds. This link forms in environments where endurance is praised and rest is seen as weakness. From childhood or early adulthood, you may have been rewarded or recognized only when you worked tirelessly, bore emotional pain silently, or sacrificed your needs for others. Your brain encodes this as a survival strategy. The more you push, the more you earn approval, love, or a sense of safety. Over time, your nervous system begins to associate exhaustion with achievement, tying your identity tightly to how much strain you can bear. Neurologically, this operates through stress response systems. Chronic stress floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline, which initially fuel performance but, when sustained, damage cognitive functions, emotional regulation, and physical health. Despite these harms, the reward system in your brain reinforces the burnout identity because the social and internal validation feels powerful. Exhaustion becomes a badge of honor rather than a signal to slow down. This identity link distorts your perception of self-care and limits your ability to rest. Rest may feel undeserved or even dangerous because without exhaustion, you fear losing your sense of worth or purpose. You might push through pain, ignore emotional depletion, and sacrifice sleep, believing that stopping means failing. This dynamic keeps you trapped in a cycle of overwork, stress, and depletion. Consider the example of a caregiver who always prioritizes others' needs over their own. They endure long hours, emotional strain, and physical fatigue but feel validated because their sacrifice is seen as selfless. However, underneath, exhaustion erodes their resilience and joy. They may feel guilty when resting, equating rest with selfishness, further strengthening the burnout identity link. This pattern also feeds into perfectionism and control. When your value depends on how much you can endure, mistakes or vulnerability threaten that image. You may push harder to cover perceived weaknesses, further exhausting yourself. The burnout identity becomes a prison where your worth is conditional on an unsustainable performance level. Healing the burnout identity link begins with recognizing exhaustion as a natural and vital signal, not a measure of worth. This requires deep self-compassion and reframing your beliefs about strength and value. You are not defined by how much you can endure, but by who you are beneath the exhaustion, the person deserving of care, respect, and rest. Practicing mindful self-care is essential. This means listening to your body's signals, honoring needs for rest, nutrition, and emotional support without judgment. Therapeutic approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy can help identify and challenge the core beliefs that tie your identity to endurance. Setting boundaries is also crucial. Learning to say no, delegate, and prioritize your well-being creates space for recovery and growth. Boundaries protect your emerging identity beyond burnout and reinforce the message that your worth is intrinsic, not performance-based. Another key element is redefining success. Celebrate not just what you accomplish under strain, but also what you achieve through balance, creativity, and presence. Cultivate joy, connection, and meaning that do not require exhaustion as proof of value. In conclusion, the burnout identity link is a deeply ingrained, often invisible pattern where exhaustion is mistaken for worthiness. It binds your sense of self to endurance, making rest feel like failure and pushing you toward chronic stress and depletion. Yet, this link can be unraveled through awareness, compassion, boundaries, and a profound shift in how you value yourself. You are more than your capacity to endure. Your true strength lies in your humanity, your vulnerability, and your ability to honor yourself fully, including your need for rest. Healing this link frees you to live a life rich in balance, vitality, and authentic worth. The self-rejection reflex. You were taught your flaws needed fixing, so now even your gifts feel like mistakes that must be hidden or improved. This is the core of what I call the self-rejection reflex, a deeply ingrained psychological pattern rooted in early conditioning where acceptance was conditional, tied to being better, less flawed, or more acceptable in the eyes of others. From childhood, many people receive subtle or overt messages that who they are, imperfections, quirks, even unique talents included, are not enough. Instead, they are taught to fix, hide, or erase parts of themselves to earn love, approval, or belonging. This reflex to reject the self, to see worth as something to be earned rather than inherent, becomes a pervasive inner voice that sabotages genuine self-acceptance. At the heart of this reflex is a profound misunderstanding, that self-worth depends on constant improvement or concealment of perceived faults. The mind becomes a relentless critic, scanning for imperfections to fix or hide, even when those very flaws might be part of what makes you unique and valuable. This internalized rejection does not stop at weaknesses. It spills over into your strengths and gifts, turning what should be sources of pride into burdens of shame or fear. You may find yourself minimizing your achievements, downplaying your talents, or feeling undeserving of praise because deep down, the reflex tells you that being fully seen is risky, that your authentic self is too flawed. Consider the story of many gifted individuals who, despite external success, suffer from imposter syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where they believe their accomplishments are unearned and fear being exposed as frauds. This is a direct manifestation of the self-rejection reflex. Their gifts become a source of anxiety rather than celebration, as the reflex tells them those talents are anomalies to be corrected or hidden. Artists who doubt their creativity, leaders who question their competence, or caregivers who feel unworthy despite their generosity all embody this internal conflict. Neurologically, this reflex is reinforced by patterns of attachment and early interactions with caregivers or influential figures. When love and approval are contingent on performance or conformity, the brain learns to associate being flawed with rejection or punishment. This conditioning creates neural pathways that trigger automatic self-criticism and shame whenever the self is perceived as imperfect or even simply visible. The self-rejection reflex becomes a survival mechanism, a way to avoid anticipated pain or abandonment, but at the cost of authentic self-expression and joy. Psychologically, living under this reflex often leads to chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. It fuels perfectionism, a ceaseless drive to fix what feels wrong, and paradoxically causes stagnation and self-sabotage. The energy spent hiding or correcting perceived flaws drains the capacity to fully embrace and develop strengths. Relationships may suffer because the fear of being truly known prevents vulnerability and connection. The reflex whispers, if they see the real you, you will be rejected, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as guardedness breeds distance. Breaking free from the self-rejection reflex is one of the most profound challenges on the path to self-love. It begins with awareness, recognizing the reflexive voice inside and understanding its origins. This recognition creates space to question the internalized messages and to see them as learned patterns rather than absolute truths. Mindfulness practices aid this process by helping you observe critical thoughts without automatically believing or acting on them. Therapeutic modalities such as cognitive behavioral therapy work by identifying and restructuring negative self-beliefs, replacing them with compassionate and realistic perspectives. Compassion-focused therapy goes further by cultivating kindness toward oneself, addressing the deep wounds of early rejection. Self-acceptance exercises, journaling, and affirmations support the gradual rewiring of neural pathways, helping to quiet the reflex and nurture a more loving inner dialogue. Real-life stories abound of individuals who have transformed the self-rejection reflex into self-empowerment. Consider someone who once hid their voice out of fear of judgment, who through therapy and practice learned to express their authentic thoughts and talents openly, gaining confidence and richer relationships. Or the survivor of harsh criticism who discovered that embracing imperfections, alongside strengths, leads to greater resilience and fulfillment. This journey is neither quick nor easy. The reflex has been running for years, possibly decades, deeply embedded in the subconscious. It resists change because it believes it is protecting you from harm. But true protection comes from acceptance, not rejection. It takes courage to face the discomfort of vulnerability and to allow yourself to be seen fully, flaws and gifts alike. As you embark on this transformation, remember that your worth is not contingent on fixing or hiding parts of yourself. Your value is inherent, whole, and deserving of love exactly as you are. The self-rejection reflex may still whisper old fears, but with patience and persistence, you can teach yourself a new way, one of radical acceptance and celebration of your authentic self. In doing so, you unlock a profound freedom, the freedom to live without apology, to shine without shame, and to love yourself beyond conditions. This is not just healing. It is reclaiming your birthright as a human being worthy of belonging, exactly as you are. The transactional worth loop, love was a currency, not a constant, so you overgive, hoping someone might finally believe you're enough. This stark reality reveals a deeply ingrained psychological pattern where love and worth become transactional commodities rather than unconditional gifts. When love is experienced not as a steady, unwavering presence but as something earned, bartered, or negotiated, it creates a loop of overgiving and constant striving. You pour yourself out endlessly, believing that each sacrifice, each act of generosity, will finally tip the scales, proving your value to others, and to yourself. This transactional worth loop often begins in early relationships where love was conditional, dependent on meeting expectations or fulfilling roles. Perhaps praise, affection, or acceptance was granted only when you performed well, obeyed rules, or put others' needs before your own. The message became clear: love is something to be earned, not freely given. Your brain and heart internalized this economy of affection, setting a foundation for lifelong patterns of seeking validation through overextension. The loop itself is exhausting and paradoxical. Overgiving temporarily buys approval or appreciation, but it rarely fills the void of self-worth. Instead, it creates dependency on external validation, making your sense of enoughness perpetually fragile. When the hoped-for recognition fails to arrive or proves fleeting, you feel invisible or unworthy, driving you to give even more in a desperate attempt to secure love. This cycle reinforces itself like a feedback loop, where love's value is continually measured by how much you sacrifice or prove yourself. From a neuroscientific perspective, this loop is tied to the brain's reward systems and attachment mechanisms. Acts of giving stimulate dopamine release, offering a fleeting sense of satisfaction and connection. Yet, when love is conditional, this reward is unreliable and inconsistent, triggering stress responses that heighten anxiety about acceptance. The vagus nerve and limbic system play roles in regulating feelings of safety and social bonding, but when love is transactional, these systems are often dysregulated, leading to emotional exhaustion and heightened sensitivity to rejection. The transactional worth loop also distorts boundaries and self-perception. Overgiving blurs the line between generosity and self-neglect, fostering a self-image tied to utility rather than intrinsic value. You may find it difficult to say no or set limits, fearing that withholding your efforts will lead to loss of love or approval. This dynamic can create unhealthy relationships where imbalance and codependency thrive, perpetuating the illusion that love must be earned through sacrifice. An example of this loop is seen in caregivers who devote themselves relentlessly, often ignoring their own needs to maintain relationships. While their giving is noble, it can stem from the deep-seated belief that their worth depends on being indispensable to others. When their efforts are not reciprocated or recognized, feelings of resentment, burnout, and invisibility emerge, yet the loop pushes them to give more, hoping to reclaim lost love. Breaking free from this loop requires profound self-awareness and restructuring of internal beliefs about love and worth. Therapy modalities such as cognitive behavioral therapy, attachment-based therapy, and self-compassion practices help individuals unlearn transactional patterns and cultivate unconditional self-acceptance. Learning to recognize that your value is inherent and not contingent on performance or sacrifice is key. Mindfulness techniques support this process by increasing present-moment awareness and helping you observe giving impulses without automatic enactment. Setting healthy boundaries becomes an act of self-love rather than selfishness. Surrounding yourself with relationships that practice reciprocity and unconditional acceptance nurtures healing and reinforces new patterns. It is important to understand that the transactional worth loop is not a personal failure but a survival adaptation formed in response to conditional love experiences. Compassion toward yourself in this journey is essential. Changing deeply ingrained relational dynamics takes time, patience, and support. Ultimately, the loop teaches a vital lesson about the nature of love. True love is constant, not transactional. It does not require you to overgive or prove yourself endlessly. Love thrives in authenticity, mutual respect, and acceptance of your inherent worth. When you embrace this truth, you reclaim your power and find freedom from the exhausting cycle of overgiving. Recognizing and breaking the transactional worth loop opens the door to deeper connection, both with yourself and others. It invites you to experience love as a steady current flowing through your life, rather than a currency to be earned. This shift transforms relationships, healing old wounds and cultivating genuine belonging. In embracing love as a constant, you also learn to be enough exactly as you are, without strings, conditions, or endless striving. This realization is profoundly liberating and healing, allowing you to give and receive love from a place of wholeness rather than scarcity. The dopamine chaos reward, your brain's reward system, the dopamine circuit, was never designed for calm. It evolved to light up in moments of challenge, threat, and stress, those high-stakes situations where survival demanded focus and action. When stress surged, dopamine flooded your system, delivering a potent mix of alertness and reward. This survival wiring was critical in your earliest days, reinforcing behaviors that kept you alive. But what happens when that wiring becomes a trap, twisting your nervous system so deeply that rest feels wrong and anxiety feels like home? This is the dopamine chaos reward. Stress, in its rawest form, is a chaos engine. It jolts your system awake, breaking monotony and pushing you toward solutions. Each stressful event triggers a dopamine spike, which the brain learns to associate with reward and value. In early life, especially in unstable or unpredictable environments, these dopamine hits became the primary source of feeling alive, engaged, or even loved. The more chaos, the more reward. Calm, by contrast, offered no such chemical surge. It felt dull, lifeless, unsafe. This wiring means your brain can become addicted to the very thing it was designed to avoid: stress. The nervous system craves the rush of dopamine from crises, deadlines, conflicts, and emergencies. Anxiety, in this warped cycle, transforms from a painful experience into a familiar, even comforting state. It signals that your brain is working, rewarding, and alive. Imagine someone whose earliest experiences were marked by unpredictability, shouting voices, sudden changes, or emotional upheaval. Their dopamine system adapted by tuning into stress as the primary reward. As adults, they might find quiet moments unsettling or even frightening. The stillness lacks the dopamine surges that their brain craves. Their inner world feels empty without the chaos. Rest becomes an alien concept, a kind of emotional void that triggers discomfort or panic. This cycle creates a paradox. The very relief you seek, rest, peace, calm, is chemically unrewarding, even threatening to your brain. You push yourself into constant motion, activity, or worry to maintain dopamine levels. This leads to burnout, exhaustion, and a persistent feeling of being on edge. Yet paradoxically, this tension feels like home, the only state where your brain feels rewarded and alive. Neurologically, this cycle is reinforced by the interplay of dopamine and cortisol. Cortisol, the stress hormone, primes your system for survival, while dopamine offers the thrill of reward and motivation. When stress and reward become inseparable, the brain learns to expect stimulation from crisis rather than calm. Over time, this rewires the nervous system into a chronic state of hyperarousal. Breaking free from the dopamine chaos reward is challenging but possible. It requires retraining the brain to find reward in stillness and safety rather than chaos and stress. Mindfulness, meditation, and deep breathing activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and repair mode, slowly teaching the brain that calm is safe and rewarding. Therapies that address trauma and early life stress help reframe dopamine associations. By creating predictable, safe experiences, the brain can relearn to reward peace and stability. Small moments of quiet, gratitude, or gentle movement become new sources of dopamine, replacing the old chaos-driven patterns. Imagine rediscovering rest not as emptiness but as fullness, a deeply nourishing state that fuels creativity, clarity, and joy. Anxiety loosens its grip, replaced by curiosity and calm presence. The brain, once addicted to chaos, learns a new rhythm, one where peace is a reward, not a threat. This transformation is a journey of patience and compassion. Your brain's old wiring served a vital purpose in the past, protecting you in turbulent times. Now, you can honor that past while stepping into a new way of being, where reward flows from calm, connection, and self-care. The dopamine chaos reward may have held you captive, but your nervous system is plastic and adaptable. With awareness and practice, you can rewrite your story. You can create a new internal landscape where rest feels right, and anxiety no longer feels like home. The freedom beyond this loop is profound, a life where peace is cherished, energy is balanced, and the brain's reward system celebrates the gentle rhythms of calm. You deserve this freedom, and it awaits your courage to step into it. The compartmentalized self-response. You learn to split emotions into locked boxes, so now joy, pain, and love live in separate rooms and never meet. This survival strategy, which we call the compartmentalized self-response, emerges when your mind, overwhelmed by conflicting feelings or unbearable experiences, separates emotions into isolated compartments. This fragmentation helps you function amid chaos or trauma, but over time, it creates a divided inner world where vital parts of your emotional self remain disconnected and silent. Imagine carrying deep joy while also harboring intense pain, but never allowing these feelings to coexist. The brain, striving to protect you, creates mental walls to contain emotions that might otherwise overwhelm or contradict each other. One box holds your happiness, carefully guarded and shared only in safe moments. Another seals away grief or fear, locked tight to prevent flooding your awareness. Yet another contains love, sometimes hidden so far away that you barely recognize it. These emotional rooms remain isolated, preventing the fluid integration that healthy emotional processing requires. This compartmentalization is not conscious. It is an automatic response encoded in your nervous system. Trauma, chronic stress, or emotional conflict can trigger the brain to dissociate parts of experience, effectively putting feelings in separate mental safes. Neurobiologically, this involves shifts in activity between brain regions like the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, allowing some emotions to be suppressed or kept offline while others remain accessible. While compartmentalization helps maintain functioning and reduces immediate distress, it carries long-term costs. When emotions never mingle, your internal experience becomes fragmented. You may find it difficult to understand how you feel overall or why your reactions sometimes seem contradictory or numb. Relationships suffer because emotional authenticity requires the ability to integrate and express a range of feelings simultaneously. Consider the person who experiences professional success and social joy yet feels an unshakable emptiness or unresolved trauma locked away. Their compartments keep these experiences separate, preventing healing or full engagement with life. This separation can lead to confusion, identity struggles, or a sense of living a double life. Healing from the compartmentalized self-response involves gently bridging these emotional rooms. Therapeutic approaches encourage safe exploration of locked feelings, integration of fragmented parts, and fostering emotional coherence. This is an intense and compelling process, as it requires facing emotions long hidden and learning to hold complexity without fragmentation. By reconnecting joy, pain, and love, you begin to experience wholeness, a life where feelings flow together, enriching your understanding of yourself and others. This integration enhances resilience, empathy, and authenticity, allowing you to respond to life's challenges with greater depth and balance. In daily life, signs of compartmentalization may appear as sudden emotional shifts, difficulty articulating feelings, or disconnection between what you feel inside and what you show outside. Recognizing these signs invites curiosity and compassion, opening the path to emotional integration. The compartmentalized self-response reveals the brain's remarkable capacity to protect yet also the complexity of emotional healing. It teaches that true strength lies not in separation but in embracing the full spectrum of human experience, allowing joy, pain, and love to meet, mingle, and transform. The hyperfix reflex. You clung to specific actions, hobbies, or roles because they brought control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. These anchors provided a sense of stability, purpose, and identity, creating what we call the hyperfix reflex, a compulsive attachment to particular patterns or identities that feel safe and manageable. But when these anchors vanish or change, your sense of self feels threatened, and your identity can collapse, leaving you disoriented and adrift. This reflex arises from the brain's need to reduce uncertainty and maintain a coherent narrative about who you are. When external circumstances are unstable or overwhelming, focusing intensely on certain behaviors or roles creates a refuge. Neurologically, the brain's reward systems activate during these fixations, releasing dopamine and reinforcing the attachment. This makes the behaviors feel rewarding, even addictive, because they provide predictability and control amid chaos. For example, a person may become hyper-focused on their work role, immersing themselves in tasks to avoid confronting emotional turmoil. Or they might fixate on a hobby, obsessively perfecting it to create a sense of mastery. These fixations become intertwined with identity. I am the worker, I am the artist, I am the caregiver. When life circumstances disrupt these roles, such as job loss, injury, or relational changes, the foundation of identity trembles or crumbles. The hyperfix reflex also limits growth and flexibility. By anchoring identity to specific patterns, you may resist change or new experiences that threaten your sense of control. This rigidity can increase anxiety and stress when faced with inevitable life transitions. The fear of losing these anchors becomes so intense that it can trigger avoidance behaviors, emotional withdrawal, or even depressive episodes. Healing the hyperfix reflex involves cultivating awareness of these attachments and developing greater psychological flexibility. Mindfulness practices help by encouraging you to observe your thoughts and behaviors without judgment, creating space between identity and actions. This space allows you to explore who you are beyond the fixed roles or patterns. Expanding your sense of self through new experiences and interests also weakens the grip of hyperfixations. When you engage with diverse activities or relationships, you build a more resilient and multifaceted identity. Therapy approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, specifically target this inflexibility by teaching acceptance of change and commitment to values rather than fixed roles. Self-compassion plays a vital role as well. It helps soften the fear and resistance around losing familiar anchors, reassuring you that your worth isn't dependent on specific identities. You learn to embrace uncertainty as a natural part of life rather than a threat. In summary, the hyperfix reflex is a survival mechanism born from a desire for control amid chaos. It creates a powerful but fragile identity tied to specific actions, hobbies, or roles. When these are lost, your sense of self feels endangered, triggering distress and confusion. Yet, by cultivating awareness, flexibility, and compassion, you can loosen this grip, embrace change, and build a richer, more resilient identity that thrives beyond any single anchor. Your worth is not confined to any one role or action. You are a dynamic, evolving being capable of adapting and flourishing through life's inevitable shifts. Let go of the need for rigid control, and discover the freedom of an identity rooted in your intrinsic self rather than transient anchors. The validation withdrawal shock. You were praised only when useful, so now praise feels like pressure, and silence feels like abandonment. This is the profound and often invisible torment of what I call the validation withdrawal shock, a psychological wound rooted in the conditional nature of early approval and affection. From a young age, many people grow up in environments where love and recognition are tied strictly to usefulness, achievements, productivity, or meeting others' needs. In such a setting, praise is less an expression of unconditional acceptance and more a transactional reward. Perform, and you earn approval. Falter, and approval is withdrawn. This conditional dynamic creates a volatile emotional landscape where praise becomes a double-edged sword, and silence echoes as rejection. The validation withdrawal shock manifests as a deep ambivalence toward praise. On the surface, being praised may feel gratifying, but beneath it often lies a paralyzing pressure to constantly meet or exceed expectations. Praise no longer feels like genuine appreciation but a heavy responsibility, a binding contract that demands perpetual usefulness. The brain, conditioned by this pattern, releases dopamine in response to praise but simultaneously activates stress hormones anticipating the next evaluation. This neurochemical cocktail generates a cycle of craving and anxiety, where each compliment triggers not just joy but the dread of potential failure. Silence, in stark contrast, is perceived as abandonment. The absence of praise, whether in quiet moments, lulls in performance, or unmet expectations, awakens a primal fear of invisibility and rejection. The nervous system, wired for social connection, interprets silence not as neutral but as a signal of loss, neglect, or even emotional exile. This triggers the fight-or-flight response, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, heightening anxiety and restlessness. The individual may scramble to regain attention and validation, sometimes through overachievement, people-pleasing, or even self-sabotage to provoke a response. Consider the child who only received parental affection when excelling academically or helping with family tasks. Praise became a currency, and silence became a void filled with fear. As adults, these individuals may appear confident and accomplished but internally struggle with chronic anxiety, perfectionism, and a deep-seated fear of being not enough when they are not actively proving their worth. The validation withdrawal shock traps them in a relentless loop of chasing approval, fearing silence, and doubting inherent value. Neurologically, this pattern is reinforced by the brain's reward and threat systems. The intermittent reinforcement of praise creates strong associative learning, where the brain becomes addicted to approval but equally sensitive to its withdrawal. The limbic system's amygdala reacts strongly to perceived social threats like silence, fueling emotional volatility. Over time, this dynamic undermines emotional regulation, self-esteem, and the ability to experience genuine rest or self-acceptance. Breaking free from the validation withdrawal shock requires reconditioning the brain's association with praise and silence. The journey begins with awareness, recognizing the pattern without judgment. Mindfulness meditation and grounding techniques can help individuals observe their internal reactions to praise and silence, disentangling automatic responses from conscious choice. Therapeutic approaches such as attachment-based therapy address the root relational wounds by fostering experiences of unconditional acceptance and safety. Cognitive behavioral strategies help reframe beliefs around worthiness, shifting the understanding from conditional usefulness to inherent value. Building secure, supportive relationships provides external proof that love and acceptance are not transactional. Self-compassion practices are vital. Learning to offer kindness to oneself in moments without praise or external validation creates an internal safety net. This nurtures emotional resilience and the capacity to tolerate silence without interpreting it as abandonment. Real-life examples abound of people who have transformed this pattern. They move from frantic striving for approval to a steadier sense of self grounded in intrinsic worth. They learn to find peace in silence, recognizing it as space for growth rather than rejection. They embrace praise as joyful acknowledgement rather than obligation. The validation withdrawal shock is a painful paradox. Craving approval yet fearing the pressure it brings, longing for connection yet fearing the silence that follows. Healing this shock invites a radical shift, from dependency on external validation to cultivating a deep, unwavering acceptance from within. In this transformation lies freedom. Freedom to be loved not for what you do but for who you are, freedom to rest without fear, freedom to live authentically beyond the cycle of praise and silence. Your journey toward this freedom is courageous and profound. It rewires not only how you relate to others but how you relate to yourself. And in that rewiring, you reclaim your birthright, the unconditional love and acceptance that have always been your true home. The boundary violation loop. When boundaries weren't taught or respected, your brain now confuses closeness with intrusion and freedom with abandonment. This painful paradox reveals how early experiences, or the lack thereof, shape the way you perceive and navigate relationships throughout life. Boundaries are fundamental to healthy human connection. They define where you end and others begin, allowing closeness without losing yourself, and freedom without feeling deserted. But when these boundaries are unclear, ignored, or violated in formative years, your brain's wiring becomes tangled, creating a loop where intimacy and independence trigger conflicting fears. Imagine growing up in an environment where personal space was never honored, where privacy was invaded, feelings dismissed, or your autonomy denied. In such a context, closeness might have felt overwhelming, suffocating, or threatening. Your nervous system, tasked with survival, learned to associate proximity not with safety but with intrusion. At the same time, attempts to assert freedom or separation could have been met with punishment, neglect, or emotional abandonment, teaching your brain that independence equals loss. This dual conditioning warps the natural balance of attachment and autonomy. Neurologically, this confusion stems from how the brain encodes safety and threat within social contexts. The amygdala and limbic system regulate responses to closeness and distance. When boundaries are violated early on, these systems may become hypervigilant, misinterpreting affectionate gestures as invasions or emotional withdrawal as rejection. The autonomic nervous system cycles between fight, flight, and freeze states, heightening anxiety around both intimacy and separation. The boundary violation loop manifests in adult relationships in complex ways. You may push people away when they try to get close, fearing suffocation, yet simultaneously feel desperate for connection and afraid of being alone. Freedom can feel like abandonment, triggering panic and attempts to cling tighter. Alternatively, you might tolerate invasions of your space, confusing control with care, or accept disrespect because the alternative, asserting boundaries, feels riskier. This loop creates emotional exhaustion and instability. Relationships become battlegrounds where your brain constantly negotiates the paradox of wanting closeness but fearing intrusion, craving independence but fearing abandonment. Over time, this cycle can erode trust in yourself and others, fostering feelings of confusion, loneliness, and self-doubt. Therapeutic approaches such as attachment-based therapy, somatic experiencing, and trauma-informed counseling help untangle this loop by retraining the brain's responses to boundaries. These therapies create new neural pathways that associate closeness with safety and freedom with security. Mindfulness practices increase awareness of bodily sensations and emotional cues, enabling you to recognize when boundary fears arise and respond with calm rather than reaction. Building healthy boundaries requires learning to distinguish your needs from fears. It involves practicing clear communication about limits and recognizing that respect for boundaries is a foundation of true intimacy. Safe relationships model this balance, providing spaces where closeness does not feel invasive and autonomy is honored without abandonment. Understanding the boundary violation loop also fosters self-compassion. You are not flawed for struggling with these conflicting feelings. You are navigating survival strategies developed in response to early experiences. Patience and gentle persistence in therapy and relationships help shift the brain's patterns toward balance and security. Ultimately, healing the boundary violation loop is about reclaiming your sense of self within connection. It means embracing intimacy as a space of mutual respect and freedom as a gift, not a threat. When boundaries are honored and internalized, relationships become sources of nourishment rather than conflict. Recognizing this loop empowers you to break free from the confusion that once ruled your relational world. It opens the path to authentic connection, where closeness feels safe and freedom feels secure. In this balance, you find peace, not as a distant ideal but as a lived experience grounded in healthy boundaries and self-trust. The conditional value trap. Your value was never a given. From early on, it was wrapped tightly in conditions. Achieve this, perform that, prove yourself worthy, and only then would love and acceptance flow. You were loved for what you did, not for who you were. This is the heart of the conditional value trap, a psychological snare that binds your sense of worth to endless hustle and achievement, blinding you to the truth that your existence alone deserves love. Imagine a child growing up in a household where affection was dispensed as a reward for accomplishment. A perfect grade, a compliment on behavior, a victory in competition, these became the currency of love. But a frown at failure, silence after mistakes, or withdrawal of attention taught a different lesson. Love is conditional, fragile, and earned. Your nervous system absorbed this lesson deeply, wiring your brain to link worth with achievement. This wiring manifests in adulthood as relentless striving. You hustle constantly, chasing the next goal, the next accolade, the next sign of approval. Your brain's reward system, dopamine-driven and hungry for validation, lights up with every accomplishment. This chemical feedback loop reinforces the belief that effort and output equal value. Yet, this loop is a double-edged sword. The more you chase, the more your sense of self becomes entangled in external measures of success. You mistake effort for worth and productivity for identity. Rest becomes guilt, failure becomes catastrophe, and peace becomes elusive. The internal voice whispers, "You must do more to be enough." This trap fuels burnout and anxiety. Your nervous system operates in a state of chronic alertness, flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, as you push against invisible walls of expectation. Even in moments of rest, your mind races, planning, comparing, fearing loss of approval. The paradox is cruel. You exhaust yourself chasing validation that remains just out of reach. Relationships also bear the weight of this trap. You may struggle to accept unconditional love from others because it conflicts with your internal narrative. When love isn't tied to achievement, it feels unfamiliar or undeserved. This breeds isolation and loneliness, reinforcing the cycle of hustling to earn your place. The conditional value trap distorts your internal compass. It eclipses the fundamental truth that you are inherently valuable simply by existing. Your worth is not a scoreboard, nor a checklist, but a living essence that needs no proof. The challenge is to reconnect with this truth beneath the layers of conditioning. Healing begins with awareness, recognizing the conditioned patterns that equate worth with achievement. Mindfulness practices invite you to witness your striving without judgment, to feel your worth in stillness, not doing. Therapy and self-compassion techniques help rewrite the internal script, soothing the nervous system and calming the relentless chase. Imagine a life where you rest without guilt, fail without shame, and receive love as a birthright rather than a reward. Your nervous system can learn to regulate stress and find balance, celebrating presence instead of performance. This rewiring takes time but is profoundly liberating. By stepping out of the conditional value trap, you reclaim your identity from the relentless hustle. You begin to honor your intrinsic worth, which exists independent of output. You shift from surviving on approval to thriving in self-acceptance. This transformation rewires your brain's reward system, replacing the dopamine highs tied to achievement with a deeper, more sustainable satisfaction of self-love. The anxious chase slows, and a peaceful rhythm emerges. The conditional value trap was once a survival mechanism in a world that demanded proof of worth. Now, it is a chain waiting to be broken. Your liberation lies in embracing your inherent value, loving yourself not for what you do, but for who you are. Your journey beyond this trap is a return home to yourself, a home where worth is unconditional and love is abundant. It is a path of courage, patience, and profound healing. The reflection disorder feedback, ChatGPT said, "You saw yourself only through the eyes of others, so now your self-image is a collage of everyone else's opinion." This is what we call the reflection disorder feedback, a deeply ingrained psychological phenomenon where your sense of self becomes a fragmented mirror, shattered into countless pieces reflecting the judgments, expectations, and emotions projected onto you by others. Instead of a stable, authentic identity, you carry a shifting mosaic of external opinions that shape how you think, feel, and act, often without realizing it. From a young age, humans rely heavily on social feedback to develop a sense of who they are. Caregivers, teachers, peers, all serve as mirrors reflecting back images of the self. But when these reflections are inconsistent, critical, or conditional, they imprint a fractured self-view. Instead of seeing yourself clearly, you see a patchwork of others' beliefs, the praise, the rejection, the hopes, the fears they hold about you. Over time, this collage becomes your inner narrative, distorting your true essence. Imagine a child constantly told they are too much or not enough, smart in some areas but lazy in others, loved only when behaving a certain way. These mixed messages embed in the psyche, producing an inner voice that echoes these conflicting opinions. As an adult, this can cause confusion and insecurity, as you struggle to discern your own values and feelings beneath the layers of external judgment. Neuroscientifically, this disorder engages the brain's social cognition networks, including the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporoparietal junction, which process how we perceive ourselves and others' views of us. When these systems become overly tuned to external validation, your self-image depends less on internal experience and more on fluctuating social feedback, making identity fragile and reactive. The reflection disorder feedback can cause chronic self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and emotional turmoil. Your self-worth becomes tied to approval or disapproval, leaving you vulnerable to manipulation or emotional exhaustion. You may find yourself constantly adjusting your behavior to fit perceived expectations, losing sight of who you genuinely are. Breaking free from this disorder is challenging but vital. It requires reclaiming the capacity to see yourself independently of others' opinions. Therapeutic techniques like mindfulness, self-compassion, and narrative therapy help you recognize these external reflections and begin to disentangle them from your core self. This process fosters self-awareness and authentic self-expression. Understanding this feedback loop also cultivates empathy for others caught in similar patterns. Recognizing how social mirrors shape identity encourages compassion, patience, and deeper connection, both with yourself and those around you. In everyday life, signs of the reflection disorder feedback include over-reliance on praise, hypersensitivity to criticism, or difficulty making decisions without external input. These moments invite reflection. Whose voice am I really hearing? Is this opinion mine, or borrowed? Ultimately, the reflection disorder feedback reveals how profoundly social interaction shapes human identity, but also how healing lies in reclaiming your own vision. By breaking the cycle of external dependence, you step into a fuller, more stable sense of self, grounded in your own experience and truth. This journey from fragmentation to wholeness is deeply compelling, demanding courage to confront internalized voices and rewrite your self-narrative. But the reward is invaluable, a self-image no longer scattered by others' opinions but clear, resilient, and uniquely yours. The suppression fallout delay. Suppressed emotion doesn't vanish, it lingers beneath the surface, like a quiet storm gathering strength until it erupts unexpectedly, often disguised as illness, self-sabotage, or breakdowns that catch you completely off guard. This is the essence of what we call the suppression fallout delay, a delayed and often misinterpreted consequence of burying your true feelings instead of facing and processing them. From early experiences, many of us learn that expressing certain emotions, anger, sadness, fear, is dangerous or unacceptable. Whether through cultural norms, family dynamics, or social conditioning, the message is clear. Show strength, keep feelings inside, don't burden others. In response, your nervous system adapts by pushing these emotions into hidden compartments, temporarily silencing them to maintain survival or social harmony. But emotions are not static. They are powerful biopsychological signals meant to be experienced, processed, and released. When they are suppressed, they do not disappear. Instead, they accumulate energy that cannot find healthy outlets. This energy builds tension in the body and mind, creating a kind of emotional debt. Over time, this debt demands repayment, often in forms that seem unrelated to the original feelings. Physiologically, chronic emotional suppression stresses the autonomic nervous system. It elevates cortisol and adrenaline levels, which contribute to inflammation, immune dysfunction, and increased risk of physical illnesses such as heart disease, digestive problems, and chronic pain. Psychologically, the unresolved emotions manifest as self-sabotaging behaviors, subconscious attempts to express or release what was held back. You might find yourself engaging in destructive patterns, withdrawing from relationships, or experiencing sudden mood swings that feel inexplicable. The delay between suppression and fallout can be deceptive. You may feel fine for years, functioning well while carrying this hidden burden. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a breakdown occurs, a panic attack, depression, an illness flare-up, or a moment of self-destructive behavior. To outsiders and even to yourself, the cause appears sudden, but in reality, it is the accumulated weight of emotions finally breaking through the surface. Consider someone who grew up in an environment where anger was punished. They learned to suppress frustration and resentment, presenting a calm exterior. As an adult, they might struggle with unexplained chronic fatigue or recurrent illnesses. Their suppressed anger has found a physical outlet because it could not be safely expressed emotionally. This delayed fallout is a signal, not a failure, pointing toward unresolved pain. Healing the suppression fallout delay begins with cultivating emotional awareness. This means learning to recognize and name your feelings as they arise, without judgment or avoidance. Mindfulness and somatic therapies can help reconnect you to your bodily sensations and emotional signals, allowing for safer and healthier processing. Creating safe spaces to express emotions is also essential. Whether through trusted relationships, therapy, or creative outlets, giving voice to your suppressed feelings prevents the buildup of emotional debt. It teaches your nervous system that expressing emotion is not dangerous but necessary for balance. Additionally, integrating self-compassion into this process is vital. Many who suppress emotions carry deep shame or guilt about their feelings. Recognizing that emotions are natural and valid helps dismantle internal barriers and fosters healing. It is important to understand that the fallout delay is not a sign of weakness but a survival adaptation gone awry. Your body and mind did what they needed to do to protect you at the time. Now, by gently uncovering and releasing these buried emotions, you can restore health and vitality. In conclusion, the suppression fallout delay is a hidden crisis born from unexpressed emotions that accumulate and erupt later, often disguised as illness or self-destructive patterns. It obscures the true source of suffering and complicates healing. Yet, with awareness, safe expression, and compassion, you can break this cycle. By honoring your emotions as they arise and allowing them to flow naturally, you free yourself from the delayed shadows of suppression and step into a life of greater wholeness and resilience. Your feelings are not burdens to hide but messages to heed. When you listen and respond to them with kindness, you reclaim your power and health beyond the hidden cost of suppression.